Chapter 457. Dake had gotten first place in the grade with a terrifying 793 points. If she hadn't been mentally prepared, she would have jumped up in joy and hid in her bedroom to secretly wipe her tears. Ollie, who hadn't expected this, opened her mouth into an O shape. A large sausage could be stuffed in. She probably hadn't realized that her naughty little brother was no longer naughty. However, the excitement didn't last long. When Dark calmly talked about what happened in the magic chariot, the atmosphere in the room turned strange. Claire was still curious about the person who had pretended to be a forest ranger and tried to pry into Dake's secret by entering his dream. However, Yvette's eyebrows were already deeply furrowed. Chris. Scorpio. Chris was the head maid of the Scorpio Palace Maids. She was in charge of spying and collecting information, as well as assassinating. As the second head maid to be recognized by the 12th Golden Armor, Chris was already 25 years old. However, she was petite and had a delicate heart, like a young girl. When Yvette called her name, she quietly appeared from the shadows without a sound. Remember the website, MVIP, can't you? 6. Yvette's tone was a little cold. Find him. 3 days. Crazy said in a low voice. She then took a step back and disappeared into the shadows again. Yvette's eyebrows gradually relaxed. She carefully tasted the red wine and said gently, "Speaking of which, there are more and more people who are restless recently. Although I support the Dove faction, it's easy for people to forget about peace." Claire smiled. That's the bad nature of humans. Sometimes we can't control ourselves. Yvette said, "That's why we need shackles." The law was a shackle, and morality was a shackle. It wasn't freedom that was restricted, but the devil in one's heart. Yvette herself wasn't a perfect person, but she saw it clearly enough. After dinner, Dake didn't say goodnight to his mother and aunt until the carriage guarded by the lion arrived at the Duke's mansion. He carried a large amount of luggage into his bedroom. The bedroom, which he hadn't seen in a long time, was still clean and tidy, without any dust. Ollie wanted to enter the room to help him unpack, but he laughed and shut her out. When the door was closed, Dake went to Paradise from his card pack. Then he unscrupulously activated Paradise. Before Olga could snap out of her depression after being rejected by her brother, she was shocked to find magic surging out from the bedroom. A network of veins crawled under her feet in the blink of an eye and spread throughout the entire second floor. Then, buildings that seemed to have come out of a fairy tale emerged from both sides of the corridor. Those buildings did not destroy the walls, but only made the corridor narrow. The Paradise facilities were arranged perfectly on both sides of the corridor, making the corridor feel like it was a dream. Dake stood in the middle of the bedroom with his eyes closed. Relying on his absolute understanding of the environment, he continued to expand Paradise. By the time he stopped, the second floor of the mansion had been completely changed. Of course, Kieran didn't allow Paradise to touch a room with people. Dong dong dong. There was a sudden rush of knocking on the door. Dake glanced at the door. Fairy Ibu had already trotted over and opened the door with its ribbon antennae. But when it saw that it was Ollie standing at the door, it slammed the door shut with a bang. Ollie, who was once again shut outside, took a deep breath, so much so that her heart swelled. But when she opened the door, she saw that it was Dake who was using the magic card, so she was no longer worried and finally turned to leave. After Dake successfully activated Paradise, he summoned the magic engineer secretary and ordered it to summon the other magic engineering fairies one by one. As for himself, he packed his luggage with the summoned magic engineering fairies. First was the catnip grass. The catnip grass that had been hibernating in the box for 3 days urgently needed to be watered with cat juice. Dake took the catnip grass out of the box one by one, and then used the magic potion to remove hibernation, to gradually wake them up. First was the short-haired catnip grass, then fox grass, cow grass, dragon grass, and lion grass. After the 5 catnip grass had all woken up, Dake's bedroom was like a zoo, and it instantly became lively. Not long after, the rest of the magic engineering fairies were summoned, and the bedroom became even livelier. His bedroom was several times bigger than the Academy's dormitory. Even if he summoned young blue-eyed dragon, it didn't feel crowded at all. Moreover, there were many partitions in the bedroom, dividing it into many different spaces. First, he planned out a piece of land and put in the mats that the catnip grass liked. Then he moved the experimental items and materials to another compartment and put the insect tree on the spacious balcony. Then he remade the big bed that Ollie used to sleep on and used it as a temporary bed for the magic engineering fairies. Although there were many rooms in the Duke's mansion, Dake was already used to having these things at hand, and he didn't plan to change them. When all the luggage was taken care of, it was already late at night. Dake happily picked up Chio Sea Lion and smiled. "Let me take you to a good place." Then he led a large group of magic engineering fairies out of the bedroom and quickly came to the bathroom on the second floor. The bathroom was as spacious as a swimming pool, and it had everything. Dake turned on the water button, and hot water slowly sprayed out from the lion head's mouth, gradually filling up the square bathtub. Momo! Chio Sea Lion immediately rushed into the bathtub excitedly. Since it was born, this was the first time it had seen such a big bathtub, so it was naturally very happy. Dake took the bath towel from the counter, took off his clothes and stepped into the bathtub. Not long after, all the magic engineering fairies were soaking in the bathtub, and even the scabbard was leaning against the corner. It wasn't afraid of rusting. The steam gradually evaporated, and the bathroom was filled with steam. Dake comfortably soaked in the bathtub, and all the tiredness in his body was gone. The next day, 6th of June. The Duke's mansion was abnormally busy since early in the morning, because today was the young master's birthday. After 9 months, the young master was finally home. And it was his birthday, so naturally, it was necessary to properly celebrate. However, the Duke's mansion had always been very low-key when it came to private affairs, and they rarely communicated with other nobles. Because of the busy business, Yvette also didn't participate in the noble ladies' tea parties. This time, she also kept to the usual practice, and only prepared to invite people from her family and some close friends to attend the banquet. Of course, there were always a few exceptions. The eldest princess, Elisha, woke up early to deal with official business, and not long after, a servant handed her an invitation. She glanced at the family emblem on the invitation and temporarily put it aside. Of course, she couldn't forget the birthday of the Valkyrie's son, so it would be the same if she looked at it later. All right. She suddenly had a thought and asked the servant, "Did the second princess and the third princess send an invitation?" The servant immediately replied, "Yes." "Is that so?" Elisha's eyes turned, and she realized that the Valkyrie's sometimes careless words might not be a joke. The Gratbayer family. The training field. Poor Deanna was pulled out of bed by her father early in the morning on the second day after she returned home. When she was in school, she could sleep soundly until 7 o'clock, but now that she was home, she was forced to wake up at 5 o'clock. Viscount Greatbayer called it rehabilitation training. But did Deanna need to be rehabilitated? Of course she did. In school, although she didn't slack off in her studies, she was very lazy when it came to physical training. Even if she was born with divine strength, if she didn't take care of it, it would degenerate. And for a qualified warrior, strength alone was far from enough. Knife, spear, sword, halberd, choose one. Under the rising sun, Viscount Gratbayer, who looked like a lion, held 4 weapons in one hand, and asked Deanna. Spear. Deanna expressionlessly took the spear that her father threw to her. Then, without warning, she thrust the spear forward like a twisting dragon. Gratbayer casually lifted the hilt of his sword to block the tip of the spear. Then he grabbed the halberd and swung it at Deanna's spear. As the saying goes, an inch longer is an inch stronger. Using a halberd against a spear was the most appropriate choice. In an instant, the sound of the father and daughter's spear and halberd exploded in the training field. The family members standing at the edge of the training field couldn't help but focus their attention. After 9 months, Deanna's spear skills were still as fierce as before, as if she was born to be a spear user. But when they looked closely, many people with sharp eyes were shocked to see that Deanna's spear skills had changed. In her unchanging bravery, there was a hint of delicacy and agility. For Deanna, who used to think of nothing but charge, this was completely unbelievable. Last night, I suddenly heard that Xiao Xiong ranked 5th in the grade in the final exam. At that time, I felt that 2 words were missing. A strong young man in his 20s said quietly. Another woman who was even stronger than him said, "No wonder I suddenly heard a lion's roar last night. It was the Viscount's roar. Can anyone tell me what is going on?" A muscular young man who was about 17 or 18 years old held his head and said painfully, "Deanna is not innocent anymore." The sound of discussion gradually gathered like buzzing bees, buzzing and buzzing. It was not until a tall woman with long silver hair walked over from behind the sun that the discussion slowly faded away. The Silver Wolf Knight, Camilla, was now the Viscount's wife and Deanna's mother. The Viscount's wife couldn't just rely on her beauty to subdue Gratbear. Even in the Great Bear family, which was famous for its bravery, few people were her match. She narrowed her eyes as she watched the father and daughter fight. She wasn't surprised that her daughter suddenly grew a brain. After all, she was already surprised last night. "Madam, what's that on your hand?" the robust woman asked curiously. Camilla waved the item in her hand and said meaningfully, "It's just an invitation." Viscount Flotty's residence. Viscount Flotty and her wife looked at the invitation placed in the middle of the table, especially at the exceptionally conspicuous family crest on it. They remained silent. Viscount Flotty had an ordinary appearance and was slightly plump. Her curly hair was yellow rather than blonde. The Viscount's wife, who had taken off her veil, had a cold expression on her face, but there was a hint of playfulness hidden in the corners of her eyes. It was once one of the noblest surnames in the kingdom. The Flotty family had experienced absolute glory, but that was already a thing of the past. Since ancient times, the Flotty family had divided the main family and the branch family. The main family only had one bloodline, and all the other branches would be demoted to branch families, unable to come into contact with any trace of the true inheritance. As such, when the main family's bloodline died prematurely, the entire family's inheritance system would instantly collapse. Not to mention, only Viscount Flotty's faction was left. Even though Viscount Flotty had taken over a portion of the main family's wealth, just having money alone wouldn't help him enter the true noble system. As Viscounts, there was a huge difference between those with real power and those without. Viscount Flotty had always drifted around the nobles and wasn't accepted by their circle. While the Viscount's wife was often invited to the tea parties of the noble ladies, she only played the role of a supporting character. Even though she tried her best to befriend others, her lack of foundation only made her a laughingstock. She was very unwilling, but it was useless. The world was just that cruel. But now, an invitation from the most dazzling family of the present day, the Dimming family, was placed in front of them. An opportunity to easily knock on the gate of ascension had appeared just like that. But what about the price? Gold wouldn't fall from the sky. You have to lose something if you gain something. Madame Flotty swallowed her saliva and asked, "Simon, are we going to attend the birthday banquet tonight?" Simon Flotty had a puzzled look. "Of course we are going. But why did the Duchess suddenly invite us to her family's banquet?" "It's probably because of Luosi," Madame Flotty said softly as she recalled the events of the previous night. "Luosi." Simon Flotty's gaze shifted. "Because of that bad boy from the Dimming family? I remember that he also received an invitation from the Shungmalian last year." Madame Flotty nodded and said, "You didn't remember incorrectly. They are classmates." Simon Flotty immediately let out a sigh of relief. "It's just a birthday invitation between classmates." "However," Madame Flotty said gravely, "do you really think that's the case?" Simon Flotty frowned. "Could it be that he has taken a fancy to Luosi? Or is it that the Dimming family has taken a fancy to our family's lost heritage?" "I don't know." Madame Flotty sighed. "We have been paying too little attention to Luosi during this period of time. Do you know that she got 13th place in the Shungmalian Academy, where geniuses gather?" Viscount Simon Flotty was clearly astonished. 13th place isn't low. Shouldn't we prepare a reward for her?" Madame Flotty said helplessly, "That's not the point. I heard some rumors recently, but I'm not sure." Simon Flotty asked, "What rumors?" Madame Flotty said, "That bad boy seems to have turned over a new leaf." "Is it the result of the Shungmalian education?" Simon Flotty asked. "If it's the Shungmalian, it's normal," Madame Flotty said again. "Last night, Luosi told me that bad boy even got first place in the first grade. Simon Flotty's mouth formed an O shape. As expected of the Valkyrie's son. Once he walks on the right path, his future is limitless. Madame Flotty nodded enviously. It would be great if our darling could also be invited to the Shungmalian Academy. In short, Luosi and that bad boy seem to have a pretty good relationship. I didn't believe it last night until this invitation card appeared in front of me. How far do you think their relationship has progressed? Simon Flotty frowned. Let's not talk about anything else. Our Luosi is very beautiful. It's hard to say whether that brat has any ulterior motives. Madame Flotty asked again. Then should we go with the flow, or? Simon Flotty's expression turned serious. Madam, this matter isn't as simple as you think. Without enough capacity, it's impossible to support heavy weapons. Having a close relationship with the Dimming clan doesn't just bring about opportunities. Although I'm a good-for-nothing, I can't let the Flotty clan's bloodline be completely cut off from my branch. We have to take our time to consider this matter. Let's first ask Luosi what she thinks. Madame Flotty subconsciously said. What does she know? Viscount Simon Flotty replied with a question. Didn't she get 13th place in the Shungmalian Academy where geniuses are as common? Madame Flotty was speechless. 4600 plus? I was delayed by something during the day. Please guarantee the monthly ticket and razor blades. Continue at midnight. Chapter 458. When Luosi was called over by Madame Flotty, she was completely stupefied. All this time, neither her uncle nor aunt had ever asked for her opinion. Even after receiving the Shungmalian Academy's invitation, they didn't ask her if she was willing to go to the academy. She would feel extremely fortunate whenever she thought about it. Fortunately, Viscount Flotty didn't stop her from going to the academy. Now that she was in Viscount Flotty's study, she didn't dare to show too much doubt in front of the two adults. Until Viscount Flotty suddenly asked, Luosi, how is your relationship with Dake Dimmung? Luosi carefully replied, It's fine. Viscount Flotty carefully observed her reaction before moving the invitation card over. Take a look at this first. Luosi stealthily reached out and tore open the invitation card. She took out the letter and gave it a look. She couldn't help but reveal a hint of joy when she saw it. I'll remember it for a second. Viscount Flotty and Madame Flotty immediately looked at each other. Then Viscount Flotty asked, What do you think? Do you want to attend Dake Diming's birthday banquet? Luosi bit her lower lip and tried her best to say, yes. Okay. Viscount Flotty nodded. He now had a rather clear understanding of his niece's inner thoughts. Come to think of it, Luosi is about to turn 13, right? Madame Flotty said faintly. 13 was only a year away from the 14-year-old marriage age. Even though there were people who suggested that the legal marriage age should be delayed in the past 2 years, it hadn't been implemented yet. If they acted quickly, they could go and propose right now. As long as the Dimming family didn't look down on them and Dake Dimming really liked Luosi, they would naturally do their best to make it happen. And if Luosi could become the future Duchess, it would greatly benefit the continuation of the Flotty family. In any case, the main family's inheritance was already gone, and the meaning of maintaining a pure bloodline was also gone. Even if they became a thorn in the side of the first prince's faction, they just had to grit their teeth and bear with it. Luosi didn't expect his aunt's thoughts to be so far-reaching. She said shyly, 2 more months. Flotty asked, Do you want to have a party for your birthday as well? Luosi hurriedly said, No need. Madame Flotty was silent. Simon Flotty immediately said, Do you know what it means for our entire family to accept the invitation to Dark Diamond's birthday party? What else could it mean? Luosi was at a loss at first. Simon Flotty slowly said, It doesn't matter if we send out invitations to this birthday banquet. However, if it's the same as the past banquets, a private banquet within the family system, then things will be different. When Luosi heard this, she seemed to realize something. She hesitated and said, Will we also be considered as the trusted aides of the Dimming family? Yes. Simon Flotty nodded. Being considered as the trusted aides of the Dimming family is beneficial for our family, But it also has its disadvantages. If the Dimming family takes the initiative to accept us, then the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. But if they don't and only invite you as a fellow classmate, then we might not be able to gain enough benefits, but have to bear the disadvantages. That's why I asked you, what is your relationship with Dake Dimming like? Luosi stood there in a daze. She was indeed intelligent at times, but that was only in the field she was familiar with. Not only had she never come into contact with such things, she hadn't even thought about it. After Viscount Flotty brought it up, her mind was a mess. She didn't know what to think. Fortunately, Viscount Flotty displayed a rare display of patience and gave her enough time to think. After a while, she finally grasped the situation and said cautiously, It should be pretty good." "Pretty good? To what extent?" Simon Flotty asked. "If you were in danger, would he risk his life to save you?" "Risk his life to save me?" Luosi was stupefied. This was truly a difficult question. She believed that if she were in danger, Dake would definitely save her. But if she added the word, risk his life, would he? No, under normal circumstances, she wouldn't want Dake to risk his life to save her. Similar plots in night novels would always say, risk his life. But in the end, the danger would be averted and no one would really die. In the end, what kind of situation would make Dake risk his life? Why would her uncle make things so difficult for Dake? Viscount Flotty was at a loss for words. While the first family meeting involving Luosi was going on in Viscount Flotty's residence, the same scene was playing out in the Great Bayer household. To the declining Flotty family, this invitation was already a hot potato. For the Great Bayer household, it was a decision they had to take seriously. The competition between the first prince and the first princess was already on the table. The old king had been watching them all this time. The old king wasn't one to stick to tradition. If the first princess inheriting the throne was more beneficial to the kingdom, he would be willing to let a woman inherit the throne. That was why there was room for the first princess to participate. And in this turbulent imperial court, how to stand became an urgent consideration for the children of the nobles. While the two current successors had their flaws, they were still the children of the king. Thus, the consequences of taking the wrong stand wouldn't be irreparable, but it would be unavoidable for them to stray from the central circle. For example, if the Great Bayer household chose the first princess's faction, and the first prince's faction won in the end, then the Great Bayer household's military power would gradually be nibbled away by the Dolan household. Of course, the Dolan household was the same as the Great Bayer household. They didn't have a position yet. Since the situation wasn't clear yet, there was no need for military giants like them to express their stance so quickly. When the two households visited each other, they would mention this openly and covertly. They would always say, "Let's talk about it in 2 or 3 years." In reality, it would take 2 or 3 years, or even 4 or 5 years, or even 6 or 7 years. Deanna, who had just stretched her body and was about to get excited, was grabbed by the back of her neck by the Silver Wolf Knight and brought back to the house. The family of 3 sat around the tea table. Deanna was lying on the table like a puddle of liquid. She pressed the invitation letter to the birthday banquet tightly under her hand. She was overjoyed. "I didn't expect to see you again the day after we parted. Since you invited us, you must have invited the Luosi household as well." Deanna was very beautiful. She didn't have the worries of the Flotty household at all. She had a huge family background as her backing, so she didn't need to worry. Besides, she had so many cousins above her. She didn't feel any pressure at all. However, Viscount Great Bayer and Viscount Camilla were very serious. "Are you forcing us to choose a side?" Viscount Great Bayer said in a rough voice. Camilla twirled her fingers. "Wait a moment. I've already sent someone to check who was invited." Since the Dimming household didn't hide anything, they quickly found out who was invited. "It's a household party. This is going to be difficult," Camilla said. This time, for Dake Diming's birthday party, other than the Dimming household's hardcore relatives and friends, only 4 extra invitations were sent out. These 4 invitations were sent to the first princess residence, the 2 little princesses' residences, the Great Bayer household, and the Flotty household. Other than that, there was no one else. "What I'm afraid of is happening." Camilla couldn't help but smile bitterly. What she feared the most was this kind of household party that she couldn't refuse. If she attended tonight's party, the Great Bayer household, or at least the Viscount's household, would be involved with the Duke's household. Even if they expressed their stance after the event, others would still have a preconceived notion. In fact, the Great Bayer household didn't have a united front. Some people thought highly of the first princess, or rather the Valkyrie behind her. Some people didn't like the idea of a female successor. Therefore, this matter was more difficult to deal with. After all, Viscount Great Bayer wasn't the head of the household yet. He still had a very strong father above him. Otherwise, with his personality, he might not care about anything. I don't care about you guys. I'm going. Deanna blinked and made the decision. She slammed the table loudly. Deanna, do you like him a lot? Camilla asked gently. Deanna didn't expect her mother to be so direct. Her face instantly turned red like an apple. The Viscount and his wife looked at each other. They both had a plan in mind. At this moment, the Valkyrie, who had no intention of interfering with the situation, was engrossed in the dressing game. Her doll, Dake Dimming, was forced to stand in front of the mirror with a stiff expression. Dake admitted that he had forgotten about his birthday. According to his plan, the first few days of his return were supposed to be a relaxing rest day. After a few days of relaxation, he would immerse himself in his studies again. However, the Valkyrie obviously had her own plans. Dake gradually realized that something was wrong. Tonight's birthday party might just be a dessert before the start, just like the pork chop rice before the execution. However, Yvette didn't show this at all. She wholeheartedly enjoyed the pleasure of dressing up her baby. If it weren't for the fact that her baby was at an age where he needed to care about his image, she would probably tie a bow on his head. Dake wasn't the only one who was suffering. On the side, all of his magic guiding fairies were placed in front of the dressing mirror. The maids of the maid palace were meticulously matching their clothes and makeup. Although this couldn't be said to be unprecedented, it was definitely quite rare. Among Dake's magic guiding fairies, some were as excited as Evie. Of course, there were also those like Meow Meow who had a pained expression. It was probably the first time the maids had come into contact with such an intelligent magic guiding fairy. They were curious and admired the youth. However, all of their attention was focused on that magic guiding fairy, the vampire's daughter. If the other magic guiding fairies were considered intelligent magic guiding fairies, then this vampire's daughter gave them the feeling that she was a true human. It was as if there was another young lady in the Duke's mansion. Is this the magic fairy you created using Ophelia and the vampire Vlad? Yvette asked curiously as she personally trimmed and thinned Dark's overly long bangs. It has nothing to do with Blood Mistress now, Dake said casually. Yvette happily hummed a little tune. If you want her to become a student of the Shungmalian Academy, I can help you submit an application, but you need to solve 2 problems yourself. Dake asked, what problems? Yvette said, one is the entrance test, and the other is the problem of her survival. In addition, although the first grade doesn't need much, if you want to be promoted to the second grade, you still need to solve the problem of magic power source. The magic guiding fairy's magic power can't support the consumption of continuous duels. Dake nodded. In short, there are 2 problems. One is the test, and the other is magic power. For the former, she has 3 months to learn. I plan to hire a few tutors to teach all of the magic guiding fairies, including her. For the latter, perhaps we can develop a plasma bag with a high concentration of magic power. Plasma bag? That's quite the style of vampires. Yvette laughed. Dake said, this is also one of the conveniences of vampires. Since he said this, Dake paused and said, if Mother needs it, I can awaken all of your magic guiding fairies' intelligence. The shocking words mixed in with the ordinary conversation made Yvette's hand tremble. She immediately felt distressed that she had cut a little too much hair. After a long while she asked, really? Even though she already knew that Dake's magic guiding fairies were all intelligent, Yvette had never thought in this direction because it was too inconceivable. As long as one was a magister, they knew that to bestow true intelligence to a simulated life form, it touched upon the innermost domain of the gate of truth. The mysteries within were even above the first refining array that constructed the entire magic guiding fairies system. That was a supreme domain that even the first and greatest Magister Merlin couldn't touch upon. If it was only the refining of a single magic guiding fairy, or the influence of fetters that allowed it to obtain intelligence higher than 3.0, but not spiritual intelligence, it might still be within an acceptable range. However, if it was so easy to make a large number of magic guiding fairies gain spiritual intelligence, then what was the purpose of those magisters who had continuously stepped forward and cut their own souls into pieces? If this secret were to be spread, those fallen archmages hiding in the dark would definitely go crazy for it. 4000 plus. Chapter 459. What was even scarier was that Dake was implying that he could also make other people's magic elves gain intelligence. This was a whole new level. Arvette took a deep breath and said, "Let me fix your bangs first." 15 minutes later, Arvette looked at her baby in the mirror with satisfaction. She put down the tools and said, "It's barely enough." Dake stood up from the chair and said, "Let's find an open space." Arvette nodded and said, "Let's go to the training hall." The size of the indoor training hall in the Duke's mansion could accommodate two 120 by 80 arenas, and still have room to spare. When the mother and son arrived at the training hall, hundreds of maids were sweating profusely. They did not stop training because of the Duke's appearance. Whether it was swinging their swords or punching, they were all loud and clear. It was not until Arvette raised her hand and clapped 3 times that everyone stopped at the same time. "Wait outside," said Wang Yao. The maids immediately filed out. A moment later, only the mother and son were left in the huge training hall. Dake looked at the overly empty training hall, and could not help but think of the lazy and slippery sword training in the past. He could not help but shake his head. If he had worked hard back then, he might have been able to compete with Deanna now. However, the past was the past. Now he was neither a warrior nor a swordsman. He was an all-round magus. "Mother, let's start with your magic illusion beast." Dake thought for a moment and took out the Great Sin card with the least side effect. Pride Eye. My emotion cards are made from my own special characteristics and soul power. They cannot be replicated. Dake had already confirmed that these Great Sin cards would not make people think of the demon god, through the reactions of the professors. Therefore, when he took it out, he did not hesitate. After carefully observing Pride Eye's appearance, Arvette did as he said and summoned her fantasy beast. Of course, it wasn't Dark's first time seeing Arvette's magical phantasmal beast, but before this, he didn't know about the term magical phantasmal beast at all. Furthermore, Arvette's magical phantasmal beast didn't look similar to those 1-star magical phantasmal beasts. The main reason was that it was too big. In the dazzling light of summoning, a 3-meter-tall white cat with a crystal crown on its head jumped out with a meow. No matter how one looked at it, it did not look like a magic illusion beast. It emitted a powerful aura that was impossible to be a 1-star. Dark thought of Professor Cazel's snow-feathered golden-eyed beast and asked curiously, "Mother, has this phantasmal beast been refined twice?" Yelvita nodded and smiled. She reached out and gently stroked the huge cat's soft, snow-white fur and said, "That's right. This cat emperor has undergone a second refinement, and is now a 3-star magic guide fairy." Dake could not help but think of his 2 magic illusion beasts and asked, "Is there a trick to refining twice?" "The trick?" Arvette pondered for a while and said, "Apart from preparing high-quality materials that are compatible enough, you probably need to stimulate the magic illusion beast's survival instinct. Modern magicians generally think that magic illusion beasts are only condensed from magic, and are very fragile in terms of life form. However, in reality, that is not the case. If you can form a bond with your magic illusion beast, and make it explode with a strong will to survive, it will not disappear so easily during the second refinement." After saying that, she warned, "Of course, even so, it does not change the fact that the failure rate of the second refinement is extremely high. If you are not completely confident, it is best not to try." "Soul bond, is it the power of the soul?" Dake pondered for a while and looked up. "I'm going to start," Arvette said. "What changes will there be after unlocking spiritual intelligence?" Dake said, There will be a temporary loss of control of the soul, but it will not last for too long. That's good. Arvet nodded. Then let's start. Dake picked up Pride Eye and cast the usual summoning spell. In the name of Dake Dimmung, Magic Illusion Beast Summoning. 3 seconds later, a dark golden ball of light slowly flew out from Pride Eye and floated towards the Cat Emperor like a large tadpole. The Cat Emperor, whose intelligence level had reached 3.0, displayed the mischievous nature of a real cat, and raised a huge paw to slap it. However, the dark golden ball of light passed through its palm and quickly drilled into its forehead. The Cat Emperor's movements stopped in an instant. In the golden vertical pupils, the originally lively eyes suddenly became extremely lively. Then, its eyebrows twitched and its face, which was already quite majestic like a king, suddenly had the appearance of a real emperor. If even Dark could see the difference, it was impossible for Arvet not to see it. The shock in her heart lasted for a long time, and she finally confirmed that what Dake said was true. Moreover, the process of unlocking intelligence was really simple. Perhaps all the essence was concentrated in Dake's emotion card. Just like after she developed the Triad Armament Refining Array, refining armament cards became especially easy. Therefore, Arvet felt a sense of pride in the depths of her heart in addition to her shock. This emotion card that could unlock intelligence was undoubtedly a product that transcended eras. If there was anything lacking, it would be its universality. If Dake's emotion card could not be replicated, it would not be able to change the entire Magitech system like Merlin's Alchemy Formation No. 1. It was a pity. However, after thinking about it carefully, it was not a bad thing. If everyone could easily create intelligent life, the world would not be hooked for long. The development of Magitech technology was already too fast. As Arvet pondered, she extended her hand to the Cat Emperor. However, the cat that had just gained intelligence did not raise its paw as she expected. She could not help but frown. The Cat Emperor, who was affected by Pride Eye, and had become overly arrogant, suddenly felt a chill, and its long body shivered. Its gaze changed instantly, and it obediently placed its huge paw on Arvet's palm. Arvet bent her fingers and scratched its paw. Her brows relaxed quietly. How do you feel? Dake asked. Arvet could not help but squint. I feel good. Does your emotion card have a cooldown time? Dake nodded. The cooldown time for each card is about an hour. I still have. I can unlock intelligence for 6 magic elves in an hour. She would not embarrass herself by taking out Bliss 3 month. Arvet said. 6 is enough. I'll unlock 6 more today. We'll talk about the rest in the future. Dake. Okay. So, Yalvet cautiously drew out a special magic elf card from her card pack. Dake glanced at the card pack and could not help but recall the time when he was young and played with these magic elven cards like playing cards. Back then, the ignorant were fearless. Dake could not help but secretly wipe his sweat. Immediately after, a trace of godlike aura suddenly attracted his attention. He subconsciously turned his head and saw Arvet quickly summoning a spear with the most ordinary summoning spell. With just a glance, Dake immediately realized that this spear should be the same type of magic elven spirit as the single scabbard. Obviously, he was not the only one who could transform into a weapon. The spearhead of Arvet's spear was in the shape of a cross, and the handle was engraved with cloud patterns. The tassel of the spear was as red as blood, and there was a soaring fire phoenix where she held it. It was so exquisite that it looked like an ornament. This immortal divine spear was refined with the tail of a phoenix as the core material. At first, I wanted to refine it into a weapon, but halfway through, I realized that it did not decay even after death and contained a fire spirit, so I changed it to a magic elven spirit. Arvet grabbed the spear handle and waved it in a circle. The spear seal suddenly ignited and formed a fire wheel. However, when she put the spear away, the flames instantly subsided and returned to calmness. The marvelous thing about the immortal divine spear was that it was immortal. It could provide life force to the wielder endlessly, allowing them to obtain the powerful ability of high-speed self-healing. In comparison, its elven form was actually flawed. After Arvet glanced at Dark, she poured magic power into the immortal spear and activated the elvish form. Then, the spear seal of the divine spear suddenly emitted raging flames, instantly engulfing the entire divine spear from head to toe. The cry of a phoenix broke through the sky, and a fire phoenix flew out from the flames. After soaring in a circle, it suddenly landed on the ground, and turned into a magic elven spirit with the appearance of a young girl. Just looking at the magic elven spirit, Dake could not help but reveal a look of surprise. This was because this human-shaped magic elven spirit was different from the 4-star level of the single scabbard after its elven form. Her aura was weak, and she was obviously only 1-star or 2-star. Arvette looked at the magic elven spirit named Phoenix, and her fair face could not help but reveal a trace of anticipation. As you can see, the immortal divine spear can transform into the Phoenix elven spirit, but she is not strong. In a sense, she is very weak. She is only 2-star. Although her magic power is 1,500 points, her attack and defense are only 100 points. She is very weak, and she only has 2 killing moves. One is Armed Form, and the other is Immortal Tinder. The ultimate skill, Armed Form, allows her to transform into the immortal divine spear's armed form. And the ultimate skill, Immortal Tinder, gives her an endless supply of magic power. As long as she is not killed in an instant, she can recover 100% of her magic power in a second. This is a divine characteristic that originates from the Phoenix. With this sure kill skill, she can even stay outside without worrying about magic power consumption. But that's it. The Phoenix Elven Spirit has no attack or defense abilities, and her magic power is only 1,500 points. She can't provide much help in battle. But after gaining wisdom, she will become extraordinary. Arvette turned to Dake and said with a little excitement, "I'll leave the rest to you." Dake nodded, and with a serious gaze he picked out a Pride 2, and began to summon. With the activation of Pride 2, a dark golden light shone out and shone on the Phoenix Elven Spirit. Bathed in the light of Pride, the Phoenix Elven Spirit's originally dull and beautiful face gradually became spirited. Her pair of phoenix eyes revealed a cold handsomeness, and her fiery red hair fluttered like flames. Success. Dake recalled Pride 2, and continued to size up the Phoenix Elven Spirit. He had roughly guessed Arvette's thoughts. The Phoenix Elven Spirit, who has the ultimate skill Immortal Tinder, can continuously produce magic power. Once she obtains intelligence like a human, she can learn to strengthen herself like the Vampire Elven Spirit. Whether it was becoming a mage or an archmage, it was an excellent path to take. Moreover, the problem of magic power that is difficult for the Vampire Elven Spirit is not a problem for the Phoenix Elven Spirit. It seems that there is another new student in the Shung Malian Academy this year. Immediately after Phoenix Elven Spirit, Arvette summoned 5 more magic guide fairies. Among them there were 2nd-tier magic guide fairies and 4th-tier magic guide fairies. Especially the Divine Armor Knight, that was summoned at the end. It left a deep impression on him. That Divine Armor Knight was an undying species of the ghost element. It did not have a physical body, and only had a set of silver armor. However, it sat on a tall and pale skeletal unicorn. Its star level was as high as 11 stars, and it had the ultimate skill Soul Attachment. It could attach itself to a wizard, allowing the wizard to transform into a real, Divine Armor Knight. At that time, the skeletal unicorn would also grow flesh and become a real unicorn. Under Dake's strong suggestion, Arvette performed a little to broaden his horizons. In the Legends of the Valkyrie, there was no record of this Divine Armor Knight. It could be seen that it was refined in recent years. As a total of 7 magic guide fairies gained intelligence, Arvette's excitement did not disappear, but she did not ask for too much. In fact, she was very rational. After the magic guide fairies gained intelligence, they would have a huge advantage in some situations, but not all situations. This was because having intelligence meant that they had emotions and personalities. Nervousness, fear, arrogance, and many other factors would have a negative impact on a battle. Magic guide fairies without intelligence could face death without fear. When their master was in danger, they could also obey orders. Of course, the most important thing was that if all of her magic guide fairies suddenly gained intelligence, the fact that Dake could easily grant intelligence to other people's magic guide fairies could not be hidden. Thus, she felt that these 7 were enough for the time being. After that, the mother and son only took Phoenix Elven's spirit and left the training hall, and temporarily left her in the care of Dake's magic guide fairies. Then time flew by, and dusk approached. A melody played in the Duke's Mansion's banquet hall. 2 and 1 4000 plus. Can't stop, continue at dawn. Chapter 460. The Dimming family was a large family that had existed since the establishment of the kingdom, and it was one of the rare families that had always been active in the public eye. The family itself had experienced several periods of prosperity and decline, but they still worked hard to survive. Before Arvette became a duke, the highest position in the Dimming family was her father, a count. After Arvette became a duke, she naturally inherited her father's position as the head of the family. The count, who had finally put down his heavy burden, took his wife and fled to the ends of the earth. Although the count and his wife would send back an envelope every time they went to a place, it was at best to say that they were safe. They couldn't even go home for Christmas once a year. As for the other elders of the Dimming family, at least they didn't run away. The current generation of the Dimming family wasn't very prosperous. There were only 2 uncles and 1 aunt above Arvette. Then these 2 uncles and aunt each had a few children, and as time went on, their children each had a few more children. The entire family's population added up to only about 30 people. Remember the website, VIP, can't you? 6. Not to mention, half of these 30 people were still underage or had just reached adulthood. This number of people was indeed very small for a large family that was in the limelight. However, the entire family had been promoted under Arvette's influence. Arvette's 2 uncles had been promoted from Viscount to Count. As for her peers, they all had official titles and held corresponding power. Because they had all received benefits, the entire family naturally revolved around her, and there were no messy internal conflicts. The relationship between the parents would naturally affect the next generation. Dake Dimming was the absolute center of this group of peers. No matter how those peers looked at him behind his back, they didn't dare to go against him on the surface. A few people who had been punished by his bad temper were even afraid of him. Tonight was Dake's birthday party, and this group of people had arrived before it started. In any case, they were a family with the same surname, so they weren't so reserved. Dake invited them to the 2nd floor of the residential area. Walking in the paradise-style corridor, this group of people, who were not sure if they were cousins, were all shocked. Dake led them to a well-equipped reception room and ordered the maids to serve them tea and pastries. A dozen or so young men and women gathered around a tea table and sat on the soft sofa. Perhaps it was because the feeling Dake gave off was too different from before, but the atmosphere at the scene was too tense. To ease the tension, Dake took the initiative to ask one of his older cousins, "Brother Thomas, I heard that you've successfully joined the Griffin Knights this year?" Thomas was a tall and skinny man with light blonde curly hair. Although he had some acne on his face, his overall appearance was still quite handsome. He looked like a member of the Dimming family. At the mention of the Griffin Knights, one of the 5 knight orders, Thomas couldn't help but curl up the corners of his lips. He proudly said, "You even noticed that? I thought you wouldn't notice such trivial matters in St. Marian Academy." "Of course, I'm just worried about you, brother." Dake leaned lazily on the sofa and let his body sink into it. The fat cat named Galileo had successfully broken free from Claire's infernal hell and escaped into his arms after he came back. Dake was getting more and more familiar with the eagle claw, which made Galileo meow comfortably. The atmosphere relaxed for a moment. Those of the same generation in the family, who had long heard that Dark Diamond had been reborn under St. Marian's education, were finally convinced that Dark Diamond had become even worse. If it was said that he was bad on the surface in the past, then now it was said that he was bad on the inside. He had transcended his appearance and was hiding inside. The siblings, John and Joey, who had been oppressed for a long time, only felt that the son of the Duke had become more terrifying after they had not seen him for almost a year. He must have hidden his bad intentions deep under his extremely deceptive appearance. They were clear as a mirror. Dake Dimming could deceive the elders who doted on him, but he could never deceive them. Dake glanced sideways at the twins who were trembling in the corner. He thought to himself that in the past, He had only brought them for a swim in the waterfall pool in the backyard, and had some intimate contact with the cute and rare aquatic creatures. The slippery surface of the aquatic creatures was very comfortable to touch, especially in the summer when they were cold and refreshing. It was simply too wonderful. But not only did they not appreciate it, they even cried and ran to complain. See, after they complained, they were spanked by their parents. That really wasn't Dake's fault. "Oh right, Joey," Dake suddenly said. Joey, who had tied her hair into a complicated spiral spring-like hairstyle, suddenly shuddered and held her twin brother's hand tightly. John held his sister's hand as he mustered up his courage to face the devil. Dake found it funny and asked, "You siblings are 12 years old this year, right?" The twins, who were only 1 year younger than Dake, were slightly stunned and had an ominous feeling. "If you're lucky," Dake continued, "you should be able to receive an invitation to enter the Shungmalian Academy soon." "Lucky? I don't want that bad luck." Joey pursed her lips tightly. Dake's gentle gaze aroused John's physiological instincts, and his palms became wet and warm. The siblings were the children of Dake's mother's uncle's son. They had shown extraordinary magical talent since they were young. Under normal circumstances, it was a given that they would receive an invitation to enroll in the academy. If the two little devils, Anna and Enchi, were included, this year's first grade of the aristocratic academy would be very lively. But if the vampire's daughter and the phoenix successfully entered the academy, which academy would they be assigned to? Dake thought for a while, then looked at his other brother, who was the same age as him, and asked curiously, "Brother Kyle, I heard that you were also recruited into the Academy of the Holy Church at the same time I entered the Shungmalian Academy?" Kyle, who had a round face and looked slightly chubby, was the child of Dake's mother's aunt's daughter. Because his magical attribute leaned towards the light, and his father was a priest, he was specially recruited into the Academy of the Holy Church last year. Dake had seen his silhouette in the group photo that the Academy of the Holy Church announced to the public. After being called out by him, Kyle's slightly small eyes couldn't help but become moist. He was so scared that he almost cried. When Dark had just finished building the small wooden house in the back of the mountain, he had forcefully dragged Kyle, who happened to be visiting the Duke's mansion, to the secret base. That night, he had even thrown Kyle into the small wooden house, which had scared him half to death. From then on, there was an indelible psychological shadow in his heart. But Dake swore to God that at that time, he really didn't know that there were so many evil beasts in the back of the mountain. He always thought that the back of the mountain was a beautiful place to have a picnic with bright flowers. The beasts that he occasionally encountered were pink rabbits that the old butler specially bought from outside to make his adventure not too boring. Now that he thought about it, the old butler's methods were really extraordinary. He actually whitewashed a dangerous place into a back garden. But how could Kyle believe that Dake didn't know what the back of the mountain was like? Although he was actually secretly protected by the maids at that time. He was only scared by the ghostly cries and howls at night. In short, after that, Kyle never came to the Duke's mansion again. Today it was really a long time since they met. At the mention of the Sacred Church's School of Arcana, Dake couldn't help but ask, "Speaking of which, Brother Kyle, in the year that you were in the Sacred Church's School of Arcana, have you seen any angels? I really want to raise one." He recalled the fairy beast that the moon god's remnant soul transformed into and couldn't help but feel envious. "I've seen them," Kyle tried his best to say, but they were all magical fairies of the candidates for holy sons and holy daughters. Real angels have long been extinct, right? Dake joked. "Brother Kyle, won't you be considered disrespectful by the Sacred Church if you say that? How can angels be extinct?" Kyle immediately realized his mistake, and was so scared that his face turned pale. He looked at Dake with fear in his eyes. Dake curiously asked, "Are you that scared?" Kyle quickly shook his head and said, "Our school rules are very strict. If you make a mistake of principle, you'll be severely punished." Dake, "How severe?" Kyle, Clean the toilet." Dake, "That's it." Kyle's eyes flashed with fear. "Is there anything worse than that?" Dake laughed. "Like being stripped naked and hung on a cross in public? I'm just joking. Don't just stand there. Let's eat and chat. If you don't talk, Won't it show that I'm not treating you well? How can that be? Your pastries are as delicious as always. This lemon tea is great. The weather is so good this year. It's sunny outside. The atmosphere gradually became better. The clouds in the evening were layered upon each other. Gold and red intertwined, rendering a different kind of charm. First, Princess Elisha brought along Anna and Anchi. They were all wearing formal banquet gowns, and their carefully dressed faces were stunning. Elisha wasn't very interested in tonight's banquet. If she didn't know that Viscount Greatabale's family was also on the invitation list, she would be more casual. However, with the participation of the Great Bear family, the banquet itself had a meaning that could be interpreted excessively. Thus, she had to make the corresponding preparations. As for Anna and Anchi, of course, they didn't care about that. They just wanted to see Dake as soon as possible and dance on him. As the saying went, there was always a taller mountain. As princesses, they certainly wouldn't be afraid of Dake. In fact, they had completely fallen out with Dake when he was 7 years old, and only eased up on Halloween last year. Therefore, they didn't have any deep contact with Dake, who became more and more unscrupulous after he turned 7. As for the reason why they fell out, it was because the second Princess Anna was born with too much magic power. One day, when they were playing together, her magic power suddenly went out of control, causing the toys around her to float up and hit Dake on the head. After that, Dake gave her the nickname Old Witch, and would often call her Old Witch. In the end, they fell out. After that, Dake became more and more naughty, and the little princesses became more and more naughty. Inexplicably, the two sides walked on two different paths that led to the same result. Tonight, I will definitely. In the carriage, the second Princess Anna gritted her teeth and muttered to herself. Princess Anchi giggled and said, "What's wrong, Anna? Are you thinking about revenge?" "It's none of your business." Anna glared at her and continued to make plans. That kick at the Halloween ball was still fresh in her mind. She must take revenge. The memory of Anna being humiliated was still fresh in Angie's mind. She asked hypocritically, "I'm just being kind. How about it? Do you need my help?" Anna looked at her suspiciously. "How can you help me?" "Like this." And she whispered in her ear, "During the ball, I'll invite him to dance and bring him to your side to create an opportunity for you." Although Anna felt that something was wrong, she still frowned and said, "What if you can't invite him?" And she said confidently, "Then it's impossible." All right, the biggest obstacle has been removed. And she couldn't help but laugh. On the other side, the carriages of Flotty's family of 4 and Gretbel's family of 3 were already on the road. This was an invitation that was hard to refuse. With the current strength of the Flotty family, they could only accept the invitation. And Gretbel's family of 3, who had the right to choose, chose to obey their precious daughter. The sunlight dimmed, and the lights inside and outside the Duke's mansion were all lit up. The rare aquatic beasts in the pool leaped up high, and their smooth skin reflected the moonlight. The relatives and friends of the Dimming family came one after another in the carriages. After they alighted, the guards led the carriages to the stable at the side and fed the horses the best fodder. Not all of the 30 or so family members came. Everyone had their own lives, and there were many who couldn't make time or were not feeling well. On the other hand, most of their hardcore friends came. Among them, the royal family's carriage was the most eye-catching. Following closely behind was the carriage of the Giant Bear family. Almost at the same time when the two carriages entered the Duke's mansion, the news about this matter was spread out. As for the Flotty family's carriage, although it was mentioned, no one paid attention to it for the time being. The family of 4 who arrived later cautiously alighted from the carriage. Before coming, Mrs. Flotty repeatedly reminded her son not to talk too much and not to run around. She was still worried and repeatedly reminded him not to run around. On the other hand, Rose's younger cousin only looked at her curiously. She didn't know if he treated her words as nothing more than a passing wind. The family didn't dress extravagantly. In fact, they were very rich, but they chose to dress in a more low-key style. Tonight's banquet was a turning point that could cause a huge change only to their family. That change might be too much for them to bear. Therefore, they had to be extra careful. 2 in 1 4,000 plus. Chapter 461. The interior of the banquet hall was exquisitely decorated. The hanging chandelier was extravagant and grand. The piano placed in the corner played on its own, an elegant melody slowly drifting out. The maids placed silver cutlery on the dining table. The dessert table by the wall was piled with all kinds of pastries and tea drinks. There was also a round plate emitting cold air, neatly arranged square ice cubes and ice cream balls. The summer was gradually flourishing. The temptation of these ice cubes was especially great for children. However, the first to arrive at the banquet hall wasn't the group of young boys and girls, but Dake's magic guide fairies. Under the lead of the maids, the neatly dressed magic guide fairies were the first to arrive. Chio Sea Lion with a bow tie on its neck immediately jumped onto the dessert table, licking the entire plate of ice cubes. One of the maids hurriedly put a scarf on it to prevent the ice cream from staining its vest. Although the rest of the magic guide fairies were also envious, they didn't lose their composure. Among this group of magic guide fairies, the most conspicuous ones were undoubtedly the mighty lion beast and the tall young green-eyed dragon. Remember this in a second. https://mvipcanshu. VIP. The lion beast was dressed in a suit and leather shoes. Its originally fluffy mane had been groomed to be extremely smooth. It was almost the same as the lion beast men, who had a higher degree of animalization. However, it did not have the natural ferocity of the beast men. It gave people the feeling of being very honest and kind, making people want to get close to it. As for the young green-eyed dragon, it was the same as Chio Sea Lion. It only wore a bow tie and vest. It was also very cute. Due to the factor of its body size, not all magic guide fairies could wear a complete set of formal clothes. For example, the trash slime could only hide in the clothes of the shapeshifter. As for the shapeshifter itself, it had transformed into a small dake in the shape of a dake. It was currently quite active. As for the magic guide fairies that could walk upright like the Dilu beast, Meow Meow, Horned Hawkman, and Big Milk Can, they were all dressed in full sets. They even wore shoes. As for those that couldn't walk upright like Ivan and Fairy Ivan, although they didn't have shoes, they still wore small skirts. For example, Kettle, Sword Scabbard, Dream Demon, Magic Guide Secretary and the like, they only had bow ties. However, the most suitable disguises were still the Vampire Miss and Phoenix Girl in human form, as well as the shapeshifter who transformed into Little Dake. The vampire's daughter was holding hands with the Phoenix Girl whom she had just met, like a pair of little sisters. Both of them were dressed in luxurious Lolita-style dresses. One was as pink as the sunset while the other was as red as fire. They were so adorable that it was against the rules. On the other hand, the polymorph was wearing Dake's old clothes, but it was happier than wearing new clothes. Dake expanded Paradise into the banquet hall, so the 10 magic guide fairies recorded in Paradise didn't have to worry about mana consumption. As for the other 7 magic guide fairies, apart from the single scabbard, they all needed his support. Dake's mana consumption had already exceeded his own mana recovery rate, but in order to let the magic guide fairies have fun, he took on all the responsibility. Anyway, the Duke's mansion didn't lack magic potions, so he could drink a bottle every once in a while. Not long after all the magic guide fairies entered, Dake also brought his brothers and sisters to the banquet hall. After coming from the enclosed room to the spacious banquet hall, the family members secretly heaved a sigh of relief and planned to find an excuse to disperse. However, before anyone could take the lead, the young boys and girls suddenly noticed the group of lively and adorable magic guide fairies. They were all stunned. Who's magic guide fairies? Thomas of the Griffin Knight Legion suddenly asked. These are magic guide fairies? Kyle of the Sacred Church's Mystic Arts Academy couldn't help but feel puzzled. Thomas couldn't help but feel suspicious. No way, you've studied magic guide fairies for a year, and you can't even recognize them? But magic guide fairies, how can they be like this? Kyle's eyebrows twitched. Dake listened to the conversation between the two and asked with a smile. Why, is there anything strange about my magic guide fairies? Kyle heard his voice and subconsciously trembled. His chubby face trembled as he said in shock. No, there's nothing strange about them, not at all. You don't have to be like this. Dake said gently. If there's anything strange about them, you can tell me, and we can talk about it. Kyle shook his head even harder. There's nothing strange about them at all. You can't be like this. Dake couldn't help but feel regretful. If there's a problem, you should bravely point it out. Kyle, I'm very disappointed in you. After saying that, he didn't look at the red-faced Kyle anymore, and walked towards his magic guide fairies. The young boys and girls who were passively following behind him saw the group of magic guide fairies immediately surround Dake after discovering him. They didn't have the slightest bit of rigidity that normal magic guide fairies had. The intelligence level of these magic guide fairies should have reached 3.0, right? The few people who knew more about magic guide fairies couldn't help but tremble in fear. They looked at Dake as if they were looking at a living monster. Wait. The siblings, John and Joey, suddenly said in surprise. The two of them followed behind. Originally, they were also secretly looking at the group of lively and cute magic guide fairies. Joey was thinking about whether he could also have such a cute little thing in the future. John, on the other hand, was staring at the young green-eyed dragon in envy. But immediately after, a magic guide fairy suddenly turned around and gave them a fright. The siblings pointed at the polymorph almost at the same time. Isn't that Dake? The polymorph couldn't help but tilt its head and call out cutely, "Busy?" The whole place was silent. Children and adults usually couldn't relate to each other's joys and sorrows. As evening came, the adults were also chatting and laughing as they entered the banquet hall. Because it was a family banquet, there weren't any special rules. They already knew about the changes that Dake had made in the Shungmalian Academy, so they weren't too surprised by the presence of the magic guide fairies. After taking their seats, they began to chat about their own topics. And the children also gathered at 2 tables after that. Even Dake's magic guide fairies gathered at 2 tables. As for Dake himself, he was called to Yvette's side. This really made the group of children heave a sigh of relief, and the pressure was greatly reduced. There weren't many people at the main table. Other than Yvette and Claire, there were only Yvette's 2 uncles. As for the remaining seats, they were naturally reserved for the 3 princesses. After greeting the 2 elders, Dake sat down beside Yvette. He didn't participate in the elders' conversation, and only listened quietly. Yvette's expression was rarely serious as she exchanged views on the kingdom's situation with the 2 earls. In fact, the kingdom's situation had already begun to show obvious signs of unrest, and various signs were appearing frequently. Among them, the actions of the Holy Church were also quite suspicious. Yvette didn't say anything about the reincarnation of the Demon King, so the 2 earls were full of doubts about the Holy Church's actions, and thought that something must have happened within the Holy Church. The few of them gradually spread out with this as the center, and then spread to other places. Their conversation only stopped when the eldest princess, Elisha, arrived. The eldest princess, Elisha, was as beautiful as ever. Her appearance seemed to add a touch of brilliance to the entire banquet hall. Some of the rude people also subconsciously became reserved. After Elisha and a few nobles greeted each other, she went to the main table and sat down without any unfamiliarity. In recent years, she had been in and out of the Duke's mansion more frequently, so she was very familiar with the facilities in the Duke's mansion. The 2 little princesses behind her smiled and sat on the other side of Dake. "Happy birthday." After the 2 little princesses sat down, they whispered to Dake. Dake responded politely, "Thank you." Their interactions during Halloween made the 3 of them familiar with each other again. "I heard that you got first place in the entire grade." Anna clasped her hands together with a look of admiration. Then she said, "At this time next year, you will definitely get first place in the entire grade." She's using this trick as soon as they meet? Dake immediately realized that she was trying to put him on the fire. He couldn't help but laugh. "Be bold. I always get first place at this time of the year." TSK. Anna suddenly lost interest and focused her attention on the table, and she walked past her and secretly pinched Dake's waist. Then she quickly withdrew her hand. Obviously, she wanted to shift the blame to Anna. Dake ignored her. Angie sneakily reached out her hand again, but was slapped down by Dark in an instant with a paw sound. She immediately pursed her lips and touched the back of her hand, pretending to be angry. Dake still ignored her. The 2 little princesses kept making small movements, but they didn't arouse Dake's emotions. He dealt with them casually, but he was thinking about when Deanna and Luosi would arrive. Compared to these two mischievous girls, Deanna and Luosi really made him worry less. Indeed, everything was afraid of comparison. With this comparison, Deanna and Luosi were better. Speak of the devil. The Gretabile family of 3 appeared at the entrance of the banquet hall, under the guidance of a maid. Viscount Greetable's aura was so strong that he attracted everyone's attention as soon as he entered the hall. It was only now that many people realized that Yvette had invited Viscount Greatbear as well. These people couldn't help but whisper and speculate about why Viscount Gretabile was attending the banquet. So much so that Camilla and Deanna, who were beside Viscount Gretabile, were ignored. Deanna was held tightly by Viscount Camilla's wife. She was like a bird whose wings were tied up. She looked listless. It was only when she saw Dake that her eyes lit up and she regained her vitality. She then hurriedly pulled Viscount Camilla to the main table. It just so happened that the family of 3 also wanted to greet the host, so they followed her and walked over. "Hey Dake, long time no see." When Viscount Gretabile and his wife were greeting Yvette and the princess, Deanna popped her head out from behind her father's back and whispered to Dake. Although Dake wanted to say that they were still together yesterday, he only nodded at this moment. Deanna wanted to say more, but she was pulled away by Viscount Gretabile and his wife. They found an empty table and sat down, appearing to be very low-key. Not long after, Flottie's family of 4 arrived. The people in the banquet hall glanced at them, and were surprised that Yvette had invited them. Flottie's family of 4 also went to the main table to greet them, and tried to find an empty table to sit down. When Deanna saw Luosi, she immediately took the initiative to invite them. The 2 families happened to be at the same table. After Luosi sat down beside Deanna, the tension in his heart finally eased a little. At this moment, everyone had finally arrived. Yvette whispered to the people at the same table, and brought Dake to the stage. She smiled and said, "Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend Dake's birthday banquet. Everyone has already received the birthday gifts that you have prepared. I'm sure that after Dake opens them tonight, he will receive many surprises. Without further ado, please enjoy the delicious food and wine." Thus the banquet began. Viscount Greatbell and Viscount Flottie didn't have much interaction before tonight. Although both of them were viscounts, one of them was a person with real power in the military, while the other was just a person with a title but idling at home. The difference in status was huge. However, an invitation to a birthday banquet had connected the 2 people who had nothing to do with each other. After a simple self-introduction, the 2 viscounts understood the reason why they were invited as if they had a tacit understanding of each other. The familiarity and intimacy between Deanna and Luosi allowed them to vaguely understand the relationship between the children of the 3 families. This was not a good thing for the parents of the 2 families who had the intention of promoting the marriage between their daughter, niece, and the Duke's son, because this meant that a competitor might appear out of thin air in front of them. Thus, their sharpness was concealed. Some topics were not easy to talk about between men, but between women there were not so many considerations. Viscount Flottie was cautious, while Viscount Gretabile was generous on the surface but ambitious on the inside. The 2 viscounts' wives feigned civility. Although there was no blood spilled, it was a cruel battle. In the end, Viscountess Flottie, who lacked confidence, was the one to fall short. Everything about her was thoroughly probed. However, Viscount Gretabile was a clever person, and did not expose her on the spot. Viscount Flottie's cheeks were slightly red. She had completely lost her imposing manner. Deanna and Luosi did not notice the mutual probing between their parents. The 2 girls whispered in each other's ears, thinking about how to invite Dake to dance with them later without being disturbed by the 2 little princesses. Deanna, in particular, was very concerned about the existence of the 3rd princess, and she. Last year during Halloween, it was this 3rd princess who disrupted her plans. This time, she wanted to be first and win back a little. Before coming here, Viscountess Greatbell saw through her thoughts and gave her a short lesson. She told her that a girl must get what she wanted. Gather your courage and take the initiative to attack. Don't worry about failure. Even if you fail, your mother will cover for you. So just do it as much as you want. The Gretabile family also had the confidence to do so. On the other hand, Luosi was a little envious of Deanna's carefree attitude. 2 and 1 4000 plus. Continue in the morning. Chapter 462. Compared to the purity of Deanna's family, Luosi's family couldn't avoid the pursuit of benefits. While Viscountess Flotty was willing to take the risk for her, she also wanted to use this opportunity to climb up the big tree that was the Duke's family. The couple didn't hide this little thought and told Luosi very frankly. But after understanding this, Luosi became more hesitant about this pursuit of love that was mixed with benefits and wasn't pure enough. What's more, she had been supporting Diana from the start. Her uncle and aunt's unexpected support didn't change her mind in the end. She could think of other ways to pursue benefits. In the end, she still wanted to pursue emotions more purely. And Deanna's position in her heart was still higher than Dake's. The birthday banquet progressed at a very moderate pace. The first website was https://m. But can't you? VIP. The beautiful and cute maids shuttled back and forth in the dining hall, bringing new dishes and taking away the empty plates from time to time. The atmosphere gradually heated up. Without Dake around, the children of the family felt a lot more relaxed. Following that, their appetites were greatly stimulated, and they couldn't control their curiosity. They began to look for topics to talk about from the only 2 guests invited by the 2 Dukes' families. Compared to the adults who would instinctively pay attention to the family's power, the children would pay more attention to their peers. I know one of those 2 girls. Kyle covered his mouth with his chubby hand and said softly. The twins at the same table looked at each other. As the older brother, John said disdainfully, "Who wouldn't know the only pearl of the Great Bear family?" Kyle was stunned. The only pearl of the Great Bear family? Who? John. Kyle was puzzled. I'm talking about the one from the Flotty family. No. John's eyes widened. I'm saying you really don't know Deanna? Kyle scratched his head and was even more puzzled. What's wrong? Why should I know her? John's expression froze. He was completely speechless. The other person at the same table, Thomas, couldn't help but laugh and then said, "Don't say any more. I happen to know those 2 people. They are Dake's classmates. Isn't it normal to invite classmates to a birthday party?" Chown disagreed. But if I remember correctly, Dolan's boy also entered school last year, but he wasn't invited. There must be something going on between these 2 girls and Dake. Joey agreed. Big brother is right, there must be something fishy going on. Tell me, if we dig it out, can we use it as leverage, and then? Hiss. Kyle exclaimed. I don't know anything. TSK. Joey looked at him unhappily. Kyle, can you not be so scared? Dake isn't a real demon. He doesn't eat humans. Kyle muttered. You weren't like this when Dake was here. Joey pouted. So when he's not here, I can't say anything. Then she whispered, by the way, do you know how Dake got back together with the 2 princesses? I remember that they had a lot of trouble back then. John pretended to be deep in thought. Sister, you have to know that time can dilute a lot of things. Joey questioned. But those are the 2 princesses. Listening to the twins act, Thomas couldn't help but say, do you really not read the newspapers? Dake and Princess and Cheese story was on the front page of the Great Sage Daily. I still remember the name of the report. Joey was intrigued. Really? Thomas said. How can it be fake? Then he straightened his expression and imitated perfectly. Shocking. The Duke's mansion and the royal family are connected by marriage, and the Duke's son and the royal princess are in love on Halloween. Joey couldn't help but laugh. Why do you make Dake seem like a hot steamed bun that everyone wants? He's so bad. Thomas still looked serious. You don't know, but what's even funnier is that the photo used in the report was of Dake and Deanna dancing together on Halloween. The reporter made a mistake and insisted that Deanna was Princess and Chi. At that time, I really laughed myself to death. There's such a thing. The siblings became more and more interested and hurriedly asked which issue of the newspaper it was from. Thomas actually reported the serial number on the spot. 0000126. While they were chatting enthusiastically, time flew by. In the blink of an eye, It was already past 8 in the evening. The head maid, Olga, estimated the time and pushed a dining cart with a huge cake into the banquet hall. The cake had a total of 13 layers and was more than 2 meters tall. Each layer was made of different materials to ensure that the flavors were different. Of course, this was the 13th birthday cake that Olga had personally made for Dake. The sweet aroma of the cake attracted everyone's attention. Adults and children stopped talking and watched Olga push the dining cart to the main table. Dake stood up eagerly. Finally, it was time for the most exciting part of cutting the cake. It was not his first time holding a birthday party, so he was very clear about the process. The Dimming family emphasized self-reliance. Other things aside, the cake had to be cut by oneself. The number of people who were present had to be cut. Of course, this was a test of skills. For example, there were more than 40 people present today, so he had to cut more than 40 pieces. He could only stop after everyone had received a piece of cake. In general, this was a kind of ritual. He had to be careful not to let the cake fall, because it was too tall. Dake had failed at this part every year. Today, it was the battle of revenge. "Do you need help, young master?" After Olga stopped the dining cart, she came behind Dake and bowed slightly. She was close to his soul and whispered in his ear, "No need." Dake hurriedly took a step forward and pulled out a long and narrow knife from the bottom of the dining cart. Olga always came close without warning, which troubled him. Seeing him like this, Olga showed a slightly depressed expression. In the past, she was the one who carried Dake up and cut the cake, but this year, she could not do it. Young master has grown up after all. The sound of the piano changed slightly. The adults stood up from their seats with wine glasses in their hands and gathered around Dake. Although the children were unwilling, they had to stand up. They could not let Dake cut the cake and deliver it to them personally. After taking a few curious glances, the group of magic elves also came to Dark's side under the reminder of the maidservant. Dake smiled and pulled out the flight spell from his card pack. He silently chanted the summoning and floated in the air. The cake had 13 layers and was more than 2 meters tall. Including the height of the table, it was more than 3 meters. If he did not fly, how could he get it? When he reached a high enough altitude, he held the handle of the knife with both hands. Under the surprised gazes of the crowd, he first cut the topmost layer of the cake. Then he cut the space between the layers and placed one of the cakes on the plate. Demon Mimi, the dream demon that flew to his side, rubbed against his face and used its killer skill telekinesis to move the first piece of cake to the bottom, to give it to the vampire's daughter. Dark turned a blind eye to its favoritism. He cut off the second piece of cake and placed it on the second plate that was moved up. In the end, this piece of cake quickly fell into the hands of the Dilu beast. It was already very rare for magic elves to participate in a banquet. These magic elves were not only exquisitely dressed, they also knew how to eat and even snatch the cake at this time. After each of the magic elves received the cake, they would call out "Happy Birthday" and happily taste it. This was the first birthday banquet in their lives, and it was the birthday banquet of their favorite master. Now that they were the first to receive the birthday cake, they were naturally full of joy. After all the magic elves received the cake, it was the turn of the younger generation. Those who received the cake, no matter what kind of thoughts they had about Dake, had to say "Happy Birthday." Deanna, Luosi, and the 3 princesses also gave him their blessings one after another. Dake cut the cake from the top layer and floated lower and lower in the air. When he was completely standing on the ground, most of the people already had the cake in their hands. Aunt Claire. After Dake passed this piece of cake to Claire, he cut another piece and passed it to Yvette. "Happy birthday, baby." Yvette couldn't help but lower her head and kiss him on the forehead before receiving the last piece of cake. Dake continued to cut another piece of cake and passed it to Sister Olga, who was standing behind him. Olga happily received the last piece of cake and ignored Yvette's glare. She gently said, "Young master, congratulations on growing up by another year." "Thank you for accompanying me and tolerating me all this time," Dake said softly. Young master, let me help you cut your cake?" Olga suggested. Dake nodded slightly and Olga took the knife from his hand. She slowly cut a piece of cake and passed it to him. The two looked at each other and smiled. When the crowd saw this heartwarming scene, they all felt warmth in their hearts. The banquet continued. After eating the cake, tonight's birthday banquet entered the free exchange segment. People greeted each other with wine glasses and chatted with each other. The Duke's banquet didn't have so much intrigue. Everyone knew each other and was careful not to get drunk. There was no excessive noise, only gentle exchanges, and it felt very comfortable. As the star of tonight's banquet, Dake walked to the open space after the piano changed again. People who wanted to dance also put down their cutlery and walked out of the crowd. The social dance segment was naturally not compulsory. Many couples invited each other, and it was full of a family atmosphere. Dake's original plan was to dance with Yvette, and that would be enough. However, he didn't expect that the moment he stood up, the atmosphere quietly changed. The two little princesses were close to him, and were already ready to take action. The third princess, Anchi, was full of confidence, but the second princess, Anna, who had been fooled by her, was still hesitant. At this time, she suddenly realized, if Anchi and Dake danced, who would she have to dance with to be able to enter the dance floor? If she couldn't enter the dance floor, how could she take revenge? This was obviously a fallacy. She glared at Anchi and stood up. On the other side, Deanna, who had been low-key the whole time, also couldn't wait to leave her seat. Rose, on the other hand, tried her best to avoid her aunt's line of sight, and only followed behind Diana. When they came back to their senses, in front of Dake, there were already 4 girls of the same generation. The 2 little princesses were delicate and had a luxurious temperament, and their golden hair shone brightly. Deanna was gradually growing up. She was less childish and more girlish, and her silver hair was like the bright moon. Luosi had been a beauty since she was young. Her light golden hair was luxurious, but at the same time, it had an untouchable ethereal feeling. Among the 4 of them, except for Luosi, they all looked boldly at Dake, their eyes full of hints and warnings. This is the scene. Yvette, who was sitting with the eldest princess, looked at this scene with a smile on her face. She had been looking forward to this scene for a long time. A boy who could make outstanding women put down their reservations and take the initiative to fight for him was what her baby should be like. Although Anna and Anchi are a bit naughty, they are actually very smart and have a clear mind. I heard that Deanna was born with divine strength and excellent physique. She must be a good seedling. Luosi is a lovely child. She is also the main bloodline of the Flotty family. Her personality is very suitable for managing a family. Who should I choose? The first one to enter the door was obviously different from the second one. The Dimming family was a part of an ancient family. Although the people were more open-minded and brave to accept new things, some important traditional ideas would not change. Yvette looked at the 4 girls and couldn't make up her mind. Of course, she hoped that there would be more of these happy troubles. Suddenly, the head maid named Jasmine walked to her side and leaned over to whisper something into her ear. After hearing this, Yvette's face immediately lit up. Hurry and invite them over. The head maid, who was over 30 years old, stood up and quickly left the banquet hall. Not long after, 2 new guests pushed open the door and entered. A fiery aura suddenly spread with the entry of one of them. Almost everyone's gaze instinctively focused on that person. Viscount Greatbear and his wife, who were sitting near the door, narrowed their eyes. Viscount Greatbear looked as if he was facing a great enemy. Viscount Greatbear's wife, Camilla, raised her eyebrows coldly. The gentle aura on her face completely changed. Sun Warrior, City Lord Sunamontier Folly, who came in from the door, also saw them at first glance. Camilla, it's been a while. City Lord Montier Folly's expression was cold. Her red hair, which was like the rising sun, moved without any wind. There seemed to be flames rising around her. With half of the giant's bloodline, she was terrifying just by standing there. 2 and 1 4,000 plus. Looking for guaranteed monthly votes in Blades. Chapter 463. Silver Wolf Knight Camilla. Sun Warrior Suna. And the link that connected them. Moonlight Swordsman Alex. Silver Wolf Knight, Camilla and Moonlight Swordsman Alex were half-siblings. Both of their surnames were Valentine, and they were one of the distant relatives of the current royal family. Sun warrior. Suna was the wife of moonlight swordsman Alex. In other words, Suna Montilfilly was Camilla's sister-in-law, and under normal circumstances, she would have to call her sister. However, the relationship between the two was not good, and it was even very bad. There were many factors involved, but the main reason was because of Alex's death. Alex was a mixed blood, and his mother was Count Valentine's second wife. She was not a human, but a rare race among the elves, moon elves. Moon elves were known as the dancers under the moonlight. Even among the elves, they had a high bloodline and could absorb the essence of the moon for their own use. Remember the website, VIP, can't you? 6 Count Valentine's bloodline had bloodline characteristics very similar to the moon elves, and they could also use moon magic. In the ancient human empires, people with this bloodline would often become noble priests of the moon. It was because of this commonality that Count Valentine was able to obtain the favor of the moon elves as a human, and that was how Alex was born. But in fact, Count Valentine was not a responsible man. He was just greedy for the beauty of the moon elves, and did not expect to hit the mark. Therefore, Alex could be said to be the product of an accident. Count Valentine did not like Alex, and it could even be said that he hated him. And Alex's mother, the moon elf, only returned to the elven lands after giving birth to the mixed-blood Alex, and then lived in seclusion and did not come out. It could even be said that Alex was raised by his elder sister, Camilla, since he was a child. Originally, if it had been like this, the siblings would have supported each other, and their days would have been barely passable. But in the surprise attack of the war, Count Valentine's territory was crushed by the demon army. In that battle, Count Valentine stood up to protect the retreat of his subjects, and in the end he died in a bloody battle. His subordinates brought Camilla and Alex along to flee with the people, but they were separated by a horde of monsters midway, causing Camilla and Alex to be separated. When they met again, Camilla was already famous, and Alex had obtained the recognition of one of the holy swords because he had activated his hero's aptitude. After that, the giant hybrid Susanna Montefiore appeared in the lives of the siblings. The three of them formed a small team, and as mercenaries, they were active in the battlefield between humans and demons. Camilla protected her brother, who was her last family member, very well and never allowed him to be in danger. But Suna thought that her behavior would only make Alex a waste. In the end, the two of them got into a dispute. After a particularly heated argument, the two of them decided to part ways. Camilla originally thought that Alex would definitely follow her, but she didn't expect him to choose Suna in the end, which was a huge blow to her. Not long after, Alex became famous as the Moonlight Swordsman. After that, the war became even more intense. Whether it was Camilla, Alex, or Suna, they all had great enmity with the demons. The two of them joined the army without hesitation. Although they were separated into the north and the south, they could always get some information about each other from the intelligence department. Until one day, Alex and Suna suddenly left the army, and the two sides completely lost contact. No one would have thought that when they parted ways, it would be the last time the three of them would see each other. After the war, Camilla tried her best to find Alex, but in the end, she only got the news that he had already passed away. Only when Susanna Montefiore built the Freedom City did Camilla know that the bitch who took her brother away had already married her brother. After many years, Camilla and Suna's daughter had already grown up, and the two of them met again in the Duke's Mansion's banquet hall. City Lord Montefiore only disliked Camilla, but Camilla saw her as a foe. The two of them were at daggers drawn. If they weren't in the Duke's mansion, they would have already fought. At this moment, Dake was preparing to hold Deanna's hand and dance for tonight's birthday party. He could see that Luosi didn't have the intention to dance, and Anna and Enchi weren't his choices from the beginning. This was the Duke's mansion, his home ground, so he naturally didn't have to give the two little princesses too much face. In short, after dancing with Deanna, he would probably dance with Luosi, and then play with the magic elves for a while. That would be the end of the night. What was left was the anticipated opening of the gifts. Every small family that was invited had at least one gift, and the maids would send them to his bedroom and put them there. In the past, the birthday gifts were things that matched his age. He hoped that this year's birthday gift would also match his current age. However, things didn't go according to his wishes, and tonight's birthday party didn't seem to end so easily. Dake didn't know who the uninvited guest was, but since he could enter the Duke's mansion, it shouldn't be too big of a problem. But this person seemed to be at odds with Deanna's family. He lowered his head to look at Deanna, and was about to ask. Deanna hurriedly shook her head. I don't know. Dake was amused, and observed for himself. City Lord Montefiore was a person who could easily imprint impressions in other people's hearts. The first time Dake saw her, he noticed that she was similar to Professor Pawa Cheong-si from her height and aura. Is she a hybrid giant? Dake's gaze turned slightly, and quickly moved away from City Lord Montefiore's body to look at the other person beside her. He couldn't help but frown when he saw her. The person beside City Lord Montefiore was naturally her daughter, Aurora. Aurora, who was a quarter giant and a quarter moon elf, was completely different from her mother, who was tall and had slightly rough facial features. Not only was she born petite, but her facial features were also as delicate as a painting. Her hair color was also inherited from her father, Alex. It was pure white, with only a little silver light at the end. But more importantly, she looked quite similar to Deanna. Dake could be said to have seen the flesh on Deanna's face disappear bit by bit, and gradually grow a beauty's point. The young girl at the door gave him the feeling that Deanna would look like after a year and a half of development. Of course, it was just a resemblance. But Dake couldn't help but ask again. What about her? You don't know her either? Deanna shook her head fiercely. I don't know her. Luoxi's eyes also showed surprise, and he said hesitantly, Deanna, don't tell me you have a long-lost sister? Deanna shook her head again. How is that possible? At this moment, on the other side, second Princess Anna giggled. No way? Don't you even know the mayor of the City of Freedom? It can't be right? Third Princess Anchi also said, that little one is Aurora Montefiore. She's very famous. The mayor of the City of Freedom. Is he a sun warrior? Dake's expression changed, and he had an idea in his mind. But just as he was about to withdraw his gaze, Aurora Montefiore, who looked like Deanna, slightly raised her head, and her bright red eyes, which she inherited from her mother, stared at him closely. Aurora didn't care too much about the confrontation between her mother and aunt. She had already started to help her mother control the internal affairs, so she could see these things very clearly. She knew that these two people would never fight. As soon as she entered the door, she began to search for Dake. Now that she finally found him, she couldn't take her eyes off him. It had been 2 months since Easter, and her fiancé seemed to have undergone some inexplicable changes. Compared to when he won the championship at the Easter Duel Festival, he attracted her attention even more. She didn't know if it was because of Dake's change, or if it was because the connection between her and him would be cut off. People would always cherish things that were about to be lost. Aurora wondered if it was because of this that caused her to have more melancholy. There was a faint sadness in her eyes, which didn't fit in with the hostility around her. Susanna, why are you here? Yelvette's voice suppressed the growing conflict. The piano music didn't change at all. She personally got up and walked to the door, which made the other family members who had similar thoughts shut up. At this moment, Viscount Greatbear and his wife snorted coldly. Without waiting for the Valkyrie to speak, they chose to temporarily retreat. City Lord Montefiore's lips curled up, and she also withdrew her aura. Then she turned to Yelvette and said gracefully, I haven't seen you in a long time, so I wanted to come and visit. I just remembered that it was your baby's birthday, so I hurried over. It's good that you still remember. Yelvette instantly smiled, but her gaze turned directly to Aurora, who was beside City Lord Montefiore. Is this little Aurora? She couldn't hide her surprise and asked. Yes. City Lord Montefiore patted the back of Aurora's head and reminded her, hurry up and greet me. Aurora quickly came back to her senses and said obediently, Auntie Dimung, I'm Aurora. Yes. Yelvette walked in front of her and bowed. It's been almost 10 years, right? You're almost as tall as my baby. Aurora's cheeks turned red, and she subconsciously tightened the corner of her clothes. Don't stand here, come over here with me. By the way, have you eaten? Yelvette directly grabbed her little hand and led her to the main table. Aurora felt the gazes around her, and a trace of shyness appeared on her face, but she still tried her best to say, "I ate a little." "Then eat a little more." Yelvette placed her in Dake's original seat and said, "I'll have Dake cut a piece of cake for you." As she spoke, she waved at Dake. Dake gave Deanna an apologetic look, walked past the 4 girls, and picked up the knife again to cut the cake. He cut 2 pieces of cake at once, and put them on 2 plates, and brought them in front of Aurora and City Lord Montefiore. City Lord Montefiore sat in Deanna's seat, and her expression eased. Although her original intention was to break off the engagement, of course, she couldn't say it in this kind of situation. Originally, the engagement between the 2 children was a private decision, and it wasn't spread out. Therefore, it was fine if it was broken off. If it was said in this kind of situation, it would be difficult to break off the engagement. Moreover, such a private matter had to be discussed in private. Only someone with a short circuit in their brain would talk about this kind of thing in public. After City Lord Montefiore took the cake from Dake, she extended her hand to Aurora. Aurora understood and immediately took out an exquisite palm-sized box. City Lord Montefiore smiled, picked up the box and handed it to Dake. She said, "Today is the first time we've met since you've grown up. You can call me Auntie. This is the birthday present I prepared for you." "Thank you, Auntie." Dake reached out to take the box, and felt a wave of warmth radiating from it. He had a rough idea of what was inside and carefully put it away. Then City Lord Montefiore pointed at Aurora and introduced her. "This is Aurora. You've met when you were young. Of course, you definitely don't remember now." Dake observed Aurora from a close distance, and felt that she was somewhat similar to Deanna. However, when he saw City Lord Montefiore and Deanna's mother's hostile expressions, he knew that it was best not to ask here. Thus, he only introduced himself to Aurora for the first time, and then took advantage of the situation to retreat. The sound of the zither was still reverberating. Dake returned to the dance floor, and this time directly extended his hand to Deanna. Deanna was pleasantly surprised, and hurriedly reached out to shake his hand, but accidentally used too much strength. Dark hissed in his heart, and held her hand in reverse, dancing ballroom dance. The 2 little princesses clasped their hands behind their backs, and gritted their teeth. However, the 2 of them looked at each other, and came to a consensus. Then they formed a pair, and deliberately stuck to Dake and Deanna's direction. Rose, on the other hand, quietly left the dance floor. However, she didn't return to her seat. Instead, she leaned to the side, picked up a cup of tea and sipped it slightly. Her gaze unconsciously turned to Aurora, who was at the main table. As if she felt her gaze, Aurora couldn't help but turn her head to look at Luosi while quietly watching Dake. Their gazes met for a moment, and then they both turned their heads back shyly. At the same time, in their hearts, they sensed some elements of each other's existence. Luosi instinctively felt threatened, and couldn't help but feel a little worried for Deanna. However, Deanna was completely immersed in the joy of being chosen, and didn't notice the little movements of Anna and Enchi at all, let alone anything else. As for Anna and Enchi, they suddenly realized that no matter how they moved, they couldn't step on Dake and Deanna's feet. Dake had already seen through their intentions, and was avoiding them. Deanna didn't look at them at all, but Anna and Enchi couldn't step on her at all. 2 and 1 4000 plus. Continue. Chapter 464. As the movements of the 2 little princesses became more and more obvious, the dance floor was filled with a different tune. The couples dancing together on the dance floor looked at them as if they were naughty children playing around. They smiled knowingly and moved to the side. This was Dake's 13th birthday party, so the childish atmosphere made it even more interesting. When the song ended, Deanna had already noticed the 2 little movements. However, since she wasn't stepped on, she just covered her mouth and laughed. Then she happily ran to Luosi and clapped her hands. When the 2 little princesses realized the difference in strength, they left the stage dejectedly. On the other hand, Dake invited Luosi to enter the dance floor. Luosi was shy, but she still accepted the invitation and danced with Dake for the second dance. The melodious melody was like a whirling skirt. Time flowed by like water. The close relationship between Dake Dimming and his two classmates was revealed through these two dances. Remember this. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. Although the relatives and friends of the Dimming family didn't have any bad intentions, they still remembered this relationship chart in their hearts. It wasn't rare for parents to form an alliance based on the close relationship between children. Therefore, they had a good impression of the Flotty family and the Great Bayer family. After all, the current Dimming family was centered around Arvet. Everyone knew that this duchess couldn't refuse her son's request. Therefore, the relationship between the Dimming family, the Flotty family, and the Great Bayer family had become a trend that couldn't be stopped. As the children of the family who enjoyed Arvet's influence, they just had to follow this trend. Arvet's existence could at least protect the family for 100 years. As long as the world didn't change greatly. When the second dance ended, Dake's magic elves rushed to the dance floor and danced around him. The atmosphere was very lively. Deanna also pulled Luosi into the dance floor. Laughter could be heard everywhere. The two little princesses looked indignant, but they also entered the circle and were overjoyed. At the main table, although Aurora also had the intention to move, she lowered her head when she thought of her goal. City Lord Munterfali and the first princess began to talk about the free cities. The first princess, Elisha, intended to incorporate the Freedom City into the territory of the kingdom. For the Freedom City, which was built in the territory of the demon race, this was both good and bad. The advantage was that the kingdom would send a garrison to help defend against the attacks of the magic beasts. The downside was that the political power in the Freedom Capital would be infiltrated. City Lord Munterfali did not support this. After all, the City of Freedom was the home of mixed bloods, which was incompatible with the government of purebloods. Moreover, there were many people who opposed this within the country. However, if the threat of the monsters continued to increase, she might have to make some compromises. The Freedom Capital built in the demon territory was like a nail nailed to a blank piece of paper, completely exposed to the eyes of those terrifying demons. It was a huge threat. Of course, City Lord Munterfali was not here to talk about official matters, so she only touched on the topic. Yvette was more concerned about the relationship between her and Camilla. So much time has passed. The enmity between you two should be resolved. How about I be the middleman? No need. Suna tearfully turned her gaze away and threw a tantrum. Yvette said helplessly, "Speaking of which, is the enmity between you two that big? Haven't you thought about reconciling after so many years?" Suna raised her wine glass and took a sip. The bright red wine spilled out of the corner of her mouth and was licked back into her mouth. Memories swirled in her eyes. City Lord Suna tearfully would never forget that dusk under the setting sun. Just like how Camilla did not expect Alex to choose Suna, Suna did not expect it either. After all, although she and Alex already had feelings for each other at that time, it could not be compared to the affection between siblings. However, Alex did choose her. She could only think of it as a manifestation of Alex's determination to rise up. Later experiences also proved this. Alex clearly did not want to be hidden in the swaddling clothes by his sister. He had strength, talent, and the determination to take revenge against the demons. But after leaving Camilla, he was too impatient to show off. Later on, the Sun Warrior. Suna was not good at protecting people. She was a warrior who never looked back. She inherited the bloodline of the sun-chasing giant, which gave her the qualifications to charge at the forefront of the battlefield. Alex walked the path of agility. Once he encountered a predicament where he could not use his advantage in speed. He was very weak. Half a month after separating from Camilla, he was seriously injured because of his carelessness. That injury left a root of his illness. After that, the injuries accumulated over the years in order to resist the demons caused the root of his illness to germinate and grow. In the end, not long after the war ended, he died of his illness. His death could not be blamed on anyone. He did not regret his choice. Although his reputation was not as good as that of the Sun Warrior, Alex was still one of the famous heroes who fought for humanity on the battlefield. He left with a smile on his face. Suna's rejection of Camilla was partly because Camilla was overprotective of Alex, which caused Alex to be too impulsive due to his lack of combat experience. Because of this, he was seriously injured. But at the same time, she was full of guilt. Her rejection of Camilla was not necessarily due to her guilt for not being able to protect Alex. She could not let it go. Alex wanted to fight, so she let him fight, but in the end he became like that. But nothing could be done both ways. Suna said to Yalvet, Camilla probably always thought that I was the one who killed Alex, but that was the path Alex wanted to take. My relationship with her does not need to be mediated. Let it be. But then she turned to Aurora and said, but she is Aurora's aunt after all. She is the closest person to Aurora other than me. I don't want them to always be strangers. Yalvet nodded. That is indeed a problem. Aurora, what do you think? Aurora raised her head slightly, her bright eyes flickering. I don't think Aunt Camilla is a bad person. As long as I take the initiative, she will accept me. Yalvet carefully observed Aurora's expression, and could not help but feel moved. This child is really good, really good. So she nodded and said, when the banquet is over, I will treat them to tea. The banquet at the Duke's mansion was surprisingly comfortable. It did not have the tense atmosphere that Viscount Flotty and Viscount Flotty were worried about. The arrival of Mayor Montierfari and her daughter only caused a momentary surprise. The two of them interacted with Viscount Greatbell and Viscount Flotty and Viscount Flotty and Viscount Flotty and Viscount Flotty. Viscount Greatbell's wife made a big deal out of Deanna's 5th place. This made Viscount Flotty, who was already very satisfied with Luossi's 13th place, frown. Viscount Greatbell then mentioned Deanna's amazing performance in the newcomers competition. Viscount Flotty did not know whether Luossi had joined the dueling club or not. But as she listened, she gradually realized that she had paid too little attention to Luossi. The birth of their son caused them to focus all their attention on him, and neglect their niece more and more. Now that their son had grown up, it was time to discipline their niece. If Luossi wants to compete with Deanna, we can't provide any support in terms of family background. She can only rely on herself. At the very least, her academic results cannot be bad. Luossi probably did not think that this birthday banquet would cause her to be burdened with academic pressure. But to her, this might be a happy worry. At around 9:30, the banquet entered its final stage. The guests began to leave one after another. Viscount Flotty and Viscount Greatbell also wanted to leave, but they received a message from a maid. A private late-night tea party? The two couples exchanged glances, and their pupils constricted. They felt that this banquet was a trap. At 10 o'clock in the evening, almost everyone had left the banquet hall. The maids swarmed in, and began to clean the banquet hall neatly and efficiently. On the other hand, Viscount Flotty and Viscount Greatbell's families were led to the second floor by Miss Maid. The second floor was decorated with paradise decorations. It was hard to imagine that this was how a duke's mansion should be decorated. However, this obviously attracted the attention of Deanna and Luossi's cousins. They wanted to pounce on it and play with it. Viscount Flotty and Viscount Greatbell's gazes were a little strange. They could not imagine what the purpose of this banquet was. It was one thing for others to create a scary path to scare people, but why did you create a fairy tale-like corridor? However, they could not reject the Duke's invitation. They could only brace themselves and walk on. The maid did not bring them to the meeting hall or study room. Instead, she brought them to a comfortable family-style living room. A short table was placed in the middle of the living room. Soft sofas surrounded the table. When they stepped into the living room, they felt a faint coolness that dispelled the heat of the summer night. It was the effect of the magic tools installed in the corner. When the two families came to the living room, they saw Yvette and the others sitting lazily on the sofa and chatting. The people present made them a little nervous. In addition to Yvette and Claire, Princess Elisha was also invited to the tea party after the banquet. As for Dark and the two princesses, they were also present. However, Dake's magic elves were brought to the big bathroom by the maids. The maids treated them like children and tried to wash them clean, and coax them to sleep early. Dake found it interesting and did not stop them. In addition to them, Monty and Phalai, who had just arrived, were also present. If there were no accidents, they would be staying at the Duke's mansion for a long time. Be casual. I won't entertain you. Yvette smiled when she saw the arrival of the two families. The two sofas beside the tea table were still empty. They were prepared for them. Viscount Flotty and Viscount Greta Bale nodded slightly and sat down on the two sofas. Yvette saw that they were still reserved, so she said frankly, "There's no other meeting tonight. We can treat this as a parent-teacher meeting." Viscount Flotty and her husband, as well as Viscount Great Bell and his wife, breathed a sigh of relief and put away their thoughts for the time being. Yvette continued, "In 3 months our families Dake and your families Anna and Luosi will be in the 2nd grade. Anna, and Chi and Aurora will enter the 1st grade. In fact, they all received an invitation to enter the school in advance. As their parents, I hope that we can communicate more in the future. For example, we can make an appointment to watch their duels. In fact, I've always yearned for that kind of life." The eldest princess also smiled and said, "I'm really looking forward to Anna and Enchi's life after they enter the school. When the time comes, I'll have to ask Anna and Luosi to take care of them. Don't let them run around like crazy." Anna and Angie curled their lips. They grabbed the fruits and bit into them, making crunching noises. Yvette continued, "Also Aurora." Aurora was shy, but she still tried her best to stand up. She picked up the teacup prepared in advance and walked toward Camilla. City Lord Montefiore leaned against the sofa with a gloomy expression. In fact, she agreed with Aurora's initiative, but she could not help but put on an expression when Camilla was around. Aurora walked in front of Camilla and placed the teacup on the table. She called out softly, "Aunt." Camilla could no longer keep a straight face when she heard Aurora call her aunt. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she suddenly hugged Aurora tightly. Anna, who was sitting next to Camilla, blinked. She still did not understand why she suddenly had a cousin. It's actually true? Dake and Luosi thought at the same time. The world was too small. When Camilla and Aurora recognized each other, the atmosphere at the scene instantly became harmonious. While the eldest princess Elisha gave her blessings on the surface, she sighed inwardly. Aurora and Camilla's reunion meant that the City of Freedom had a solid backer in the Great Bear family. In addition, Yvette, who had a good relationship with City Lord Montefiore, looked like the City of Freedom would not fall. Perhaps she should also change her plan of incorporating the City of Freedom into the kingdom's territory to a friendly alliance. However, if the current circle could be formed, her faction would become more solid. In terms of overall strength, she would not be suppressed by her brother. When the time came, it would depend on who could benefit the people. This was a healthy competition that more people wanted to see. Of course, Aurora and Camilla's reunion did not mean that the relationship between City Lord Montefiore and Camilla was compromised. She was like a lion placed in a corner, watching as Aurora and Camilla became more and more intimate. Then, she picked up her own specialty lemon tea. Sour. 2-in-1 4,000 plus. I accidentally slept all the way till dawn, hee hee. Chapter 465. Dake fiddled with Galileo's meat pads as he watched the interaction between Aurora and Camilla with a smile. He wasn't familiar with the two of them, but that didn't stop him from feeling happy that the two of them were reunited. Aurora and Camilla's problems were nothing more than remnants of the war. Although the war had ended, the sorrow left behind by the war hadn't disappeared. People like them who could still reunite with their loved ones were already considered very lucky. Many more people lost everything. Dake was slightly happy. It was great to be able to witness the beautiful side of the world on his 13th birthday. After the thin layer between the two of them was removed, Camilla held Aurora's hand as if she wanted to pour out all the words she had held back for 10 years. She impatiently asked Aurora all sorts of questions. Aurora patiently listened to her questions and answered them one by one. Her answers were clear and her words were appropriate. While the two of them were talking, the others naturally didn't just sit there. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. They gradually began to treat tonight's late-night tea party as a meeting between the parents of the students, as Yvette had said. Because Claire was a professor at Shungmalian Academy for a period of time, she received the attention of the parents. Viscount Greatbell would rudely ask her about Anna's performance in class. Viscountess Flotty would also ask a question or two from time to time. As for Arvette, she enthusiastically asked Deanna and Luosi, wanting to know more about Dake's daily life from them. Although Dake was sitting on the side awkwardly, Deanna and Luosi would excitedly answer those questions when they were asked. The fact that the three of them were always together was completely exposed through their conversations. Fortunately, when Dake was in the academy, it was basically the classroom, the library, and the dormitory. At most, there was the cafeteria, so there wasn't any embarrassing incident that could become a joke. Before this, the parents of the three of them basically didn't have any interactions in private. Even though Arvette and Viscount Greatbell had known each other for a long time, they only met to discuss business. But tonight, because of the trio, their parents quickly became familiar with each other. Perhaps if this continued, Yelvette's small wish of watching the children's duel with a group of parents could really come true. It was late at night. Everyone chatted for almost an hour. When the clock struck 11 o'clock, they had to end the conversation. Yelvette kindly invited the two viscountesses to visit the Duke's mansion often. Of course, they would bring their daughters, nieces along. On the other hand, Camilla repeatedly reminded Aurora not to forget to visit their house more often. Dake waved goodbye to Deanna, Luosi, Anna, and Enchi. In the end, the first princess boarded the carriage with Anna and Enchi. Then, in the dead of the night, the three carriages slowly started to move in different directions. This scene naturally fell into the eyes of those who were observant. After sending off the three families, Dake and the others returned to the living room. But without those outsiders, the atmosphere in the living room changed slightly. Yelvette pulled Dake, who was trying to sit on another sofa, to her side. Claire sat on her left, on the other side of the tea table. On the other side sat City Lord Montefort and Aurora. Things were not over yet. Yelvette's words were very clear. Since Suzanne Montefort was able to put aside the matters in the Freedom City and bring her daughter to visit the Duke's mansion from afar, of course, it was not just for fun. Thus Yelvette slightly focused and said, "Can you tell me now? You personally came to find me. Is there something you can't tell me?" City Lord Montefort's expression also became serious. She glanced at Claire, who was sitting next to Yelvette, and was rebutted by Claire with a smile. She knew that the Beast Sage's relationship with Yelvette was probably even closer than her relationship with Yelvette. Since that was the case, there was nothing to hide. Thus she slowly said a term, the Easter Duel Festival. Yelvette raised her eyebrows and said, "You watched it too?" "Yes." Suzanne nodded slightly. "At the time, Principal Erdii happened to be in the Freedom City, so I accompanied her to watch the competition." Yelvette immediately became vigilant. "So you came for my baby?" Suzanne looked at Dake and nodded again. "Coming for me?" Dake frowned slightly, but his gaze turned to Aurora, who was next to Suzanne. Aurora was caught by his gaze, but she subconsciously lowered her head, her cheeks slightly red. Dake had been curious about her reaction for a long time, so he said, "Aunt Montefort, if you have something to say, just say it. I shouldn't have done anything out of line in the Easter Duel Festival, right?" But when he said this, not only Suzanne but even Yelvette and Claire looked at him strangely. Even Aurora quietly raised her head and stared at his face. Dake was baffled by this scene and said helplessly, "Is there a problem?" "I think I know what's going on," Yelvette said. "Suzanne, come here." Suzanne continued, "The problem isn't with you, but with your magic guide sprite." Dake's eyebrows deepened. "My magic guide sprite? What's wrong with them?" Suzanne said, "To be specific, it's your white cat and the lion man." Dake, "The Dilu beast and the lion man?" Suzanne sighed. "It's them two magic guide sprites with hero's aptitude." At the mention of hero's aptitude, Dake gradually had some clues. It was just that magic guide sprites had hero's aptitude. Although this was special, similar situations existed, and there were even more special situations. Among the classification of magic guide sprites, there was a human species. It contained infinite possibilities. Even if he were to accidentally refine some historical figures, it was also very possible. There had been more than one Grand Magus who had tried to replicate historical figures through magic guide sprites. Although that kind of replication could only produce empty shells, it had already been listed as a taboo and had been jointly banned. But if it was accidentally refined, there was nothing that could be done. Those human species magic guide sprites usually had special characteristics, and Hero's aptitude was just one of them. Of course, the Dilu beast and the lion man were not human species. Is the problem here? Dake pinched Galileo's flesh, feeling that this was unlikely. In fact, it really had nothing to do with it. Suzanne slowly said, "Do you know the origin of the title hero?" Dake nodded slightly and said, "I have some understanding of it." The origin of the title hero was extremely deep. According to the legends of this world, the first human was called Saint, which was both a god and a human. In order to protect humans, Saint had once split into three. After these three split fetuses grew up, one of them became an unparalleled hero. Another one became an omniscient sage. The last one became an incomparably noble emperor. And all the heroes, after that, were the descendants of the first hero. They were the orthodox children of God. This was the origin of the title hero, and also the reason why hero was special. Suzanne saw him nod and continued, "The hero's bloodline comes from Saint, the orthodox children of God." But with the change of time, the hero's bloodline gradually dispersed, and more people had the hero's bloodline, while the hero's bloodline became thinner and thinner. In fact, my husband Alex also has a thinner hero's bloodline. He could have become a hero candidate, but because he refused the Holy Church's conferment, it was not recorded. To become a true hero, one must obtain the recognition of a large number of holy swords, and use them to supplement the bloodline. The previous hero, Brett God, became a true hero because of this. And his descendants were born with close to 50% hero's bloodline. I think you should know who his descendant is, right? Dake nodded. White Gouda. Suzanne's expression gradually became serious. Then you should also know that White Gouda grew up in an orphanage. Dake deliberated and said, "It's like this." Suzanne said, "Your mother and I were comrades in arms of the previous hero, Brett God. We experienced the final Demon King crusade together, and witnessed Brett God's sacrifice." Dake. He was great. Suzanne closed her eyes slightly. He was indeed great. He clearly had a premonition that he was going to die before the battle, but he still rushed to the front lines without hesitation. This is Brett God, a person who bears the fate of a hero. Dake. The fate of a hero. Suzanne narrowed her eyes. A hero is a person who bears the fate of a hero. Since ancient times, no one who has become a true hero has been able to live for long. Dake couldn't help but frown. So there's such a thing, but why aren't there any related records? Suzanne slowly said. Haven't you noticed that there are very few records about heroes? Dake couldn't help but fall silent. He didn't believe in the so-called fate of a hero, but there were indeed very few records about heroes. If one calculated the lifespan of the heroes through probability, perhaps one could really come to the conclusion that Suzanne had mentioned. This was because he suddenly realized that people's impression of heroes had always been that they had eradicated evil, but there were no stories about them after they eradicated evil. Did the hero become low-key after eradicating evil? To be able to become a true brave warrior, which one of them didn't have outstanding strengths? How could they disappear so easily? Could there really be a so-called fate of a hero? It had to be said that Suzanne's words were indeed very confusing. Yvette and Claire actually didn't refute her. This at least supported Suzanne's words to a certain extent. After a long while, it was Yvette who finally spoke. Whether the fate of a hero exists or not isn't actually important. After the war ended, I specially found someone to do research on it. The lifespan of the heroes in the past was indeed not long. Even if they didn't die on the battlefield, they would die after the war due to some kind of misfortune. I'm more inclined to believe that there's a problem with the hero bloodline itself. There's a problem with the hero bloodline itself. Dake slowly repeated it. Yvette's words were obviously easier to accept. But didn't the so-called hero bloodline in the legends come from 1/3 of a saint? Or was it because the human body couldn't withstand 100% of the hero bloodline? It was difficult to find evidence for such conjectures. Dake could only temporarily believe that being a hero wasn't a good job. And now he had more or less guessed what Suzanne wanted to say. And sure enough, Suzanne immediately said to him, "Of your two magic elves, the lion beast is fine, but the Diru beast has shown a rich hero aptitude that even surpasses the current hero's son. I've discussed it with Headmaster Aerti. The hero aptitude doesn't come from nowhere. If you continue to develop, it's very likely that you'll become a hero in another way. This is also what we're worried about," Yvette muttered. In fact, even if the hero doesn't have the problem of dying early, the path to becoming a hero will be difficult and tortuous. This isn't what we want to see. Moreover, the appearance of a large number of hero candidates often means that a disaster is coming. Suzanne nodded and said, "This is precisely why I rushed over. Regarding the matter of Dake possibly becoming a true hero, we must treat it seriously." Aurora, who was beside her, couldn't help but be slightly surprised. "Didn't you come to break off the engagement?" However, City Lord Suzanne Montilferi didn't mention the word break off the engagement. She didn't even mention the word engagement. This made Aurora waver. Suzanne continued, "In fact, my husband's injuries have never been cured because of the hero bloodline he awakened. The poison corroded the holy sword and infected his bloodline. There isn't a single magic potion that can have an effect on a mutated bloodline." "Is it dragon blood cancer?" Yvette frowned slightly. Suzanne nodded sadly, "Yes." Dake didn't understand and asked, "What is dragon blood cancer?" Yvette slowly said, "It's a special disease that was once popular among hero candidates. For hero candidates who have the aptitude to become heroes, it's like an evil dragon that can devour their lives in an instant." Suzanne said, "In short, being a hero isn't a good job. If a new disaster really happens, let us old fellows take it on." "However," Yvette said, "it's rare for your thoughts to be so similar to mine. However, we should all know that some things can't be solved just by running away. Moreover, Dake has his own ideas, and I will support his decision. Of course, to let him have the capital to make his own decisions at all times. I have prepared a holiday package for him. Aurora is also here, so let's go together." 2 and 1 4,000 plus, requesting votes. Chapter 466. Dake actually knew a little about Yvette's preparations, but he thought it was just a normal summer tutoring. He didn't expect it to be because of the Dilu beast and the lion beast. The Dilu beast and the lion beast's hero's aptitude was quite difficult to understand even for him, especially after knowing that the hero's aptitude in this world was related to bloodline. It was even more so. Maybe the bloodline here is a metaphysical concept and not a physical inheritance. But if that's the case, how did the dragon blood cancer appear? Could it be that this disease is actually a curse? Dake thought for a while, then he saw Yvette turn around and ask, "So baby, what do you think?" Dake subconsciously said, "Hero? Not even a cat." Yvette, huh? Dake then said, "The basic attributes of a magic fairy are fixed. The Dilu beast's hero's aptitude is this much at the beginning and will be this much in the future, unless it's refined a second time. Aunt Monterfolly probably thinks that I, who refined the Dilu beast, have similar potential as the Dilu beast. But I don't think we need to worry about this." Suna asked curiously, "What do you mean?" "Remember the website, VIP, can't you?" Dake shrugged. "I can't activate the true power of the holy sword." Suna said, "But maybe it's just that it hasn't awakened yet." Dake sighed. "Awakened? I don't really like this word. Anyway, I don't have any interest in becoming a hero. Even if I really awaken the hero's aptitude as you all worry, it'll be fine as long as I don't collect the holy sword. So for the holiday package that we're preparing for this, can we?" Dake was just about to push away the summer tutoring when he saw Yvette's face quickly turn from sunny to gloomy. She said dejectedly, "But this is what Mom prepared for a long time." Dake couldn't bear to see this, so he subconsciously changed the topic. "Then let's try it." Yvette. *3a. Therefore, the matter of summer tutoring was finalized. Dake sadly realized that the schedule for this holiday might be even tighter than when he was in the academy. After that, the two families chatted for a while. The head maid, Jasmine, knocked on the door and entered. she informed the two guests. Your rooms have been arranged. You can sleep at any time. Then let's talk tomorrow. Yvette stood up and looked at Suna. Suna understood and said, let's take a bath together? It's been a long time since I had a private conversation with someone. Yvette nodded and said to Dark, go back and sleep early. Tomorrow morning, bring Aurora around the capital for a good stroll. Okay, Mom. Dake turned to Aurora and nodded. See you tomorrow. Aurora raised her small hand and said softly, good night. Dake smiled and left the living room. He knew very well that Lord Montefort might have other things to say, but it didn't seem appropriate to say it in front of him. Since that was the case, he would let her talk to Yvette. After he left, Yvette called Claire and Aurora, and the four women went to the fitting room to choose their clothes. There were many clothes left behind by Suna in the Duke's mansion. Although it had been a long time, they were still well preserved. They even found Aurora's childhood open crotch pants, which made Aurora's face and ears turn red. After each of them had chosen their pajamas, the four of them entered the indoor bath accompanied by the maids. Unlike the bathtub Dark used, this bathtub was slightly smaller. It was already filled with hot water, and steam was rising from it. Yvette took off her clothes, grabbed a bath towel, and walked into the steam. Suna looked at her flawless body with envy and said, time is really kind to you. Yvette smiled and looked back. You're not bad either. Suna sighed and took off the last of her clothes. Because of her physique, her skeleton was larger and her shoulders were slightly wider. However, the muscles in her abdomen were very tight, making her waist rather narrow. The half of her body exposed by the bath towel was also more voluptuous than Yvette's. She exuded a slightly rough and wild beauty from head to toe. She didn't fear the temperature of the water at all as she stretched her long legs into the bath and slowly submerged her body in the water. Perhaps her busy work made her neglect her exercise, but the exhaustion from the long journey from the Freedom City actually showed on her body. She narrowed her eyes and felt a little sleepy under the influence of the steam. Yvette, who was beside her, was now surrounded by a faint radiance. It was a halo that flowed naturally from her body. It was the manifestation of transcendence. After this, Aurora carefully followed Suna into the water. Her petite figure was completely different from her mother's, so she was always mistaken for someone else's child. In the steam, she seemed like she would disappear at any time. Claire smiled and slid in on the opposite side of the bath, giving them a suitable amount of space. The four of them closed their eyes and soaked for about 3 minutes. Only then did Suna slowly say, Yvette, about the arranged marriage. The corners of Yvette's mouth curled up slightly. Have you told little Aurora? Suna nodded and said, this child is precocious since she was young. I don't hide many things from her, and I can't hide them from her. Yvette thought for a moment and asked, what does she think? Aurora grabbed the bath towel and said her thoughts. It's pretty good. Suna secretly glared at her. Yvette couldn't help but smile. It's been so many years. You also know that I proposed the arranged marriage back then to make you feel more at ease. Now only Claire and Elisha know about it. Suna asked, have you mentioned it to the first princess? Yvette smiled. After all, you were originally a mixed-blood resident who moved from the kingdom, so you had to mention it to the royal family. In other words, it was because of this relationship that the Freedom City hadn't been attacked by the kingdom in the past 10 years. The first princess Elisa had also helped out in this process. Suna sighed and said softly, since even the first princess knows about this marriage, why don't we set it like this? Aurora originally thought that her mother was finally going to mention the matter of canceling the marriage. She had even prepared a lot of drafts in her heart for this. She was just waiting for her mother to bring it up so that she could argue with her and try her best to change her mind. This was the first time she wanted to go against her mother's wishes after she understood things. And because of this, she had been hesitant. However, when she finally made up her mind, her mother actually changed her mind at the last minute. Aurora couldn't help but shut her mouth. She found that she could no longer guess her mother's thoughts. However, Yvette wasn't too surprised. Instead, she asked, this isn't your original intention, right? Suna's face was hidden in the mist, and it was unknown what expression she had. However, she still said, "You've already guessed it, haven't you? When I first came, I actually wanted to cancel this marriage." Yvette smiled. "I can see it. I have the same worries as you. Before tonight, I was actually very afraid that Dake would stubbornly insist on his own way and want to become a hero. After all, becoming a hero is something that all children of this era yearn for." Suna said, "But now I know that he has no intention of becoming a hero at all. The fate of a hero is difficult to change. Even people with a thin bloodline will encounter hardships. I really don't want Aurora to be like me and lose the person she loves the most in the future." Yvette said lightly, "No, I will protect him well." Suna said, "I know now. He is more responsible than I thought. If I miss out on him, I can't imagine where else Aurora can find a more suitable husband than him. So our marriage? That won't do," Yvette suddenly said. Suna was instantly stunned. "Eh?" Aurora, who originally thought that things were back on track, couldn't help but grip the bath towel tightly. Claire, who was soaking opposite her, looked at the little girl's startled expression like a hamster, and couldn't help but cover her mouth and laugh. The development of the situation was getting more and more interesting. After Yvette rejected Suna's marriage proposal, she said methodically, "As a mother, of course, I can't make a decision that goes against my son's wishes. You also saw how popular my baby is now. Whether it's Deanna from the Great Bell family, Luosi from the Flotty family, Anna and Enchi, they all have thoughts about him. And he doesn't reject Deanna and Luosi. I am sure he would hate me if I arranged this marriage for him without permission. No, absolutely not." As she said this, she shook her head vigorously with a troubled expression. But Suna could clearly hear the pride in her tone. Although she felt that her daughter wouldn't be worse than those people, she couldn't say it now. "That's right," Yvette said at this time. "Since little Aurora has already received the Shengmalian admission notice in advance, then let her stay with me. When school starts, she will go to the academy with Dake." Suna said helplessly, "That's fine. I'm relieved to leave her with you. When she was in the Freedom City, she had too many things to worry about. Now that the situation has stabilized, I hope that she can have a childhood that her age should have." Yvette said, "Don't worry, there's Dake." Late at night, Dake didn't know that his fiancée was ruined. He carefully extracted today's great sins. Because pride's index was not enough, he had to choose greed today. After 6 days of extraction, the great sins stored in the insect tree were frowny face pride, 12, 5 greed, 9 5. This reserve was enough for him to cultivate a fruit of pride and a fruit of greed. But in order to accumulate enough to refine pride, he needed to continue storing pride. On the other hand, greed didn't have so many restrictions. After Dake completed today's extraction, he turned to look at the magic guide fairies who were pretending to be asleep on the bed. The maids had already moved enough beds in during the day. Unknowingly, I already have 17 magic guide fairies. I only need 3 more before I can start the first upgrade of Paradise. If Paradise enters version 2.0, the magic guide fairies will be more free. The magic guide fairies that haven't been recorded in Paradise won't have to be recalled back into the magic guide card at night. Magic guide fairies don't actually need to sleep. It shouldn't be a problem for them to stay up late to study if they're diligent, right? They calculated. Next, I'll have to hire tutors for them. The ideal situation is for them to complete all the basic lessons in these 3 months. Anyway, let's look at the present first. Speaking of the present, he couldn't help but get excited. This year's birthday present could be said to have ushered in a good start. The present from Mayor Suna Montier-Folly was very pleasantly surprised. He opened the intricate box again and took another look at it. He saw that there was an egg the size of a pigeon's egg inside. The color of the eggshell was slightly transparent, and there was a faint light from within. If my judgment is correct, this should be a fairy egg. The fairies and fairies were 2 different things. The former was a subhuman, while the latter was a kind of elemental life form, and it was a higher-level elemental life form. Professor Shi-Erfu was a fairy envoy who was favored by the wind fairy. Not only could he freely control the wind, but he could also turn himself into the wind. Of course, that wasn't something that could be done casually. But the foundation of everything was the wind fairy. If Dake could hatch the fairy egg in his hand, he might also be favored by the fairies and become a fairy envoy. Even if he couldn't, he could still raise it as a magical animal. He was going to restart the Magical Animal Society in the future, and he had to have 1 or 2 magical animals. Otherwise, it wouldn't live up to its name and wouldn't survive. This fairy egg came at the right time. Unfortunately, fairies and fairies are the most compatible. Usually, only fairies can become fairy envoys. It's a bit difficult for me. Dake couldn't hide his smile as he closed the box and placed the other birthday presents in front of him one by one. Let's start with Aunt Claire's birthday present. He first picked out the largest gift box. Claire's signature and blessing were clearly written on the label of the gift box. Grow up quickly, Claire Kate. Dake removed the label and carefully put it away before opening the gift box. I knew Aunt Claire wouldn't let me down. Dake looked at the present in the gift box, and his eyes curved into the shape of a moon. He saw that there were materials arranged in different categories in the gift box, and there was a page of instructions on the side. He pulled out the instruction manual, and there was indeed the method to upgrade Paradise, written in beautiful handwriting. It's not difficult to enter Paradise as information again, but it needs to be adjusted according to my own Paradise attribute. With these materials, I can try many times. 2 and 1 4000 plus. Chapter 467. The Elven Egg and the upgrade materials for Paradise were gifts that Dake hoped would be suitable for his age. While he was overjoyed, he immediately picked up a gift box with a cute bear head on the label. This box was obviously a gift from the Great Bell family. Perhaps the bear head on the label was drawn by Deanna herself. Speaking of which, when are Deanna and Luossi's birthdays? I have to give them something as a gift. Dake thought as he opened the gift box. Of course, it couldn't be a gift like a bear pillow. However, it didn't seem to be something that met his expectations. What is this? Looking at the 2 bottles of ointment in the box, Dake couldn't help but hesitate. The bottles that sealed the ointment were completely sealed metal bottles. Each bottle was only 2 fingers tall and the size of a coin. The name of the ointment was printed on the bottle cap. 100 Refinement Ointment. Remember, https://m. VIP can't you? VIP 100 Refinement Ointment. I have an impression of it, but I just can't remember. Dark furrowed his brows. Something that could leave an impression on him should be the famous property of the giant bear family. Since he couldn't remember, it was probably because he didn't know much about it. It's probably an ointment for body refinement or healing. Let's ask tomorrow. It was late at night, and he couldn't possibly disturb Yvette or Claire. Dake put the 2 bottles of 100 Refinement Ointment aside for the time being and opened the gift from the Flotty family. In the gift box with the Flotty family's emblem, there was a dark blue pearl. There was a label under the pearl, and its origin was clearly written on the label. Deep Sea Night Pearl Sapphire Star. This thing is priceless. Why would the Flotty family think of giving me this gift? Dake couldn't help but hesitate. The Flotty family didn't have many people now, but they had a lot of inheritance. Their personal wealth had indeed reached the peak because of this. However, no matter how rich a person was, they wouldn't waste it casually. Giving such an expensive jewel as a gift would inevitably make people think that the Flotty family had something to ask for. However, in fact, this kind of ordinary jewel that only had an appearance was of limited use to Dake. Even if it was used to refine a magic fairy, it would still seem unsightly. You can't force it. Dake shook his head and placed the deep sea luminous pearl aside. Next, this is a gift from the Thomas family. This is a gift from John and Joey's family. This is a gift from the Kyle family. Some of the gifts given by those families were rare and unique books, some were expensive calligraphy and paintings, some were gold and silver jewelry, and there was even a gift of a VIP pass. Dake moved everything to the other side, leaving only the VIP card and the VIP card. It was the only book that was written by an ancient bard himself, Travels Around the World. Although it was unknown whether or not he had personally experienced it, because this travel book recorded many dangerous places, And some places were even unheard of. It was an eye-opener, so it was widely circulated. Whether it was used as a leisure reading material or to broaden one's horizons, it was excellent. At least it was more useful than those gold and silver jewelry. Then there was the VIP pass. That was a pass of the highest level. It allowed one to freely spend money in a high-class place jointly run by many nobles, Soul Captivation. Because Soul Captivation used a membership and invitation system, one had to have a pass to enter. One could buy most of the luxury goods and enjoy a lot of high-class services inside. It was an important place for nobles to enjoy themselves. Of course, since the pass was given to Dake, it was naturally a place that could be investigated. This person knows a lot. Dark took a closer look and saw that it was a gift from an unremarkable uncle. He was most likely one of the operators of Soul Captivation. Many of the luxury goods used by nobles had extra value. The things one could buy in Soul Captivation were comparable to some black markets. Anyway, I'll keep it for now. Soon, there was only the final highlight left. It was a birthday gift from the first princess and a birthday gift from Yvette. The best was always left for last. Dake took the first princess birthday gift and opened it. The label of the gift read frowny face happy birthday. Elisha. It was a very simple blessing. However, after opening the box, the radiance released from it was not simple at all. No wonder it's so heavy. There was a piece of or the size of a football in the box. Because it had obviously been purified and refined, the surface of this or had no impurities. It emitted a silver-like radiance and gave off a cold and sharp feeling. It was called cockroach steel. It was a precious mineral that was first discovered in a place called Cockorote. After it was developed and used by a mage, it was renamed magic steel. Magic steel had extremely special properties. It was naturally very hard and could absorb magic. Once the magic injected exceeded a certain threshold, the magic steel would show extremely strong ductility and plasticity. Even if one was not a professional blacksmith, they could still use magic steel to create armor and weapons. The combat armor that Yvette refined in the early years mostly used magic steel as the main body. In the current situation where raw materials were getting scarcer, this whole piece of magic steel was extremely difficult to obtain. Princess Elisha probably gave this gift because she considered that I can refine combat armor cards. This is a good thing, but I'm afraid that if Meow Meow doesn't have a good grasp of magic control, it can't be refined. If that's the case, I can only do it myself. It will take too much time. Yes, let's wait for Meow Meow to master magic control. Dake decided. Then he finally picked up the gift from Yvette. Every birthday, he looked forward to his mother's birthday gift the most, because it could always hit his spot. It was the thing he wanted the most at that time. But this year he didn't even know what he wanted the most. Other than the problem of the bloodline core that could not be solved for the time being, he mostly relied on his own efforts to get what he wanted. Let's see what kind of surprise mother can bring me. Dake opened the last gift box with great interest. The label of the gift box, as usual, said Happy Birthday, baby. After opening the box, he saw a glowing seed floating in the air. The seed's appearance was nothing out of the ordinary. The glow it emitted was a kind of gentle green light. With Dake's knowledge, he could not recognize its origin at first glance. He had to pick up the manual that came with it. The manual had a simple description written in fine handwriting. Diesel's seed. The seed of the desire tree is obtained from the branches of the mother tree of desire after several generations of reproduction. The superior product of the insect tree. Speaking of the tree of desire, Dake had some understanding. The insect tree that he had been using was a subspecies of the tree of desire. As a superior product, the tree of desire was certainly not only the size of a potted plant. Under normal circumstances, it could grow to 15 to 25 meters. The trunk was thick and the crown was extremely lush, like a banyan tree. Every branch and every leaf of the tree of desire could be used to store emotions, desires, knowledge, and other mental substances. It was very stable and would not cause any contamination to the mental substances. The storage time would pass with the lifespan of the tree of desire. Using the branches of the tree of desire, one could also artificially create a superior thinking bottle. A normal superior thinking bottle had the same storage as the thinking bottle, which was 30 drops. However, it was more stable and had a shelf life of up to a month. Using the branches of the tree of desire to create a superior thinking bottle had a shelf life of up to 3 months. Using it as a replacement for the insect tree was an excellent choice. The only problem was that the cat grass might not like to use a bottle to absorb, great sin. Therefore, the insect tree was still necessary. In short, this is what I need the most right now. Otherwise, with the insect tree's storage of only 24 drops, it won't be enough. The problem now is where to plant it, how to cultivate it, and how fast can it grow. Tomorrow morning, I'll have to get some related books to read. Dake was in high spirits as he tried to cultivate Diesel's seed into a tree in these 3 months. After opening all the gifts, Dake counted his gains and listed all the things that might be useful together. They were: Elf Egg Paradise Upgrade Package 100 Refined Paste Travels Around the World Haunted by Dreams Pass Magic Steel Diesel's Seed. All in all, he had gained a lot. He couldn't help but think that there were 365 days in a year for his birthday. After calculating the birthday gifts, Dake crawled into bed with satisfaction. He didn't know when something cold had crawled into his bed, but it made him feel refreshed and his quality of sleep improved. The next day, when the sunlight shone into the room through the curtains, Dake suddenly woke up and realized that he had slept late again. After returning home, he felt relaxed. In just 2 days, he seemed to have thrown away all the good habits that he had cultivated in the academy. This won't do. Dake shook his head and yawned, then carried Chio Sea Lion out of bed. Sometimes he would think that if he wanted Chio Sea Lion to evolve, he would most likely need the Great Sin card. But where would he find the card? This was a difficult question. Let me think, what do I need to do today? His floating thoughts gradually calmed down. He would put his studies aside for now. Right, hatching the elf egg and planting Diesel's seed. And bringing Aurora around the Imperial City. It's quite annoying. Thus, Dake dragged his feet out of bed and grabbed a Greed 3 card to use on Trash Slime. In the name of Dake Dimming, I'll use this card to evolve. When Trash Slime successfully evolved into Greed Slime 2, he buried his entire body in it. Very soon he felt refreshed. With Greed Slime 2, he didn't even need to wash his face. Even so, Dake still went into the bathroom to wash up as usual. After he was done, he changed his clothes and put on his card bag. He also put the Haunted by Dreams pass into his bag and prepared to leave. Whoosh! The little demon beast suddenly flew over and accurately landed on his shoulder. Dake didn't throw it back and just left the bedroom. Aries. Olga was already standing beside him. "Young master, do you want to eat?" she asked gently. Dake shook his head and said, "Of course I want to eat breakfast, but Sister Olga, you don't have to do this for Dake." "I like it." Olga revealed a bright smile. Dake couldn't stand it and changed the topic. "I'll leave my magic elves to the Sisters of the Aries." He had already summoned Magician's Secretary before he left, so the summoning of the Watcher Alliance would be left to him. When he arrived at the dining room, Dake saw Claire leisurely sipping tea with a roll of newspaper beside her. "Good morning, Aunt Claire," Dake said sweetly. Claire smiled. "Good morning, Dake. Your mother went to work. You're mine today." Dake's expression stiffened and he laughed dryly. "I'm going to take Aurora out for a walk today." Claire raised her index finger and shook it. "I know. I mean, you can find me if you need anything." After sitting down, Dake asked about his doubts from last night. Claire answered, "The incubation of an elven egg requires 2 things." Dake laid out a napkin and asked, "What are they?" Claire said, "One is a treasure of the corresponding attribute, preferably something like monster blood or plant juice, which can give the elves additional characteristics. The other," Dake asked, "What's the other one?" Claire said, "It's fate." Dake was stunned. "What do you mean?" Claire said, "With enough energy for incubation, the elves already have consciousness. You need to induce them to incubate and make them want to come out. If they don't want to come out, then they really won't come out." How capricious. Dake was a bit speechless, but if it's the corresponding attribute, the elven egg that Mayor Montilfoli gave me should be of the fire attribute, I just happen to have. That's not of the fire attribute. Suna mournfully pushed open the door and entered under the guidance of a maid. Dake couldn't help but turn his head and see the somewhat shy Aurora beside her. Aurora gave him the feeling that she was Deanna, whose personality had been reversed. He first greeted her, then asked curiously, "So what attribute does that elven egg have?" Suna smiled and said, "That's a flaming sun elf." Saying this, she raised her finger, and a flame flickered on her fingertip. The flame gradually grew bigger, and turned into a flaming sun elf in the shape of a small sun. This Mayor Montilfoli, who didn't have any elven bloodline, was actually an elven envoy. Before Dake could be surprised, as if stimulated by the flaming sun elf, two elves suddenly flew out of Aurora's hair. Of the two elves, one was very similar to Mayor Montilfoli's elf, but slightly smaller. The other was like a small crescent moon, emitting waves of coldness and coldness. A flaming sun elf and an ice moon elf. At this moment, even Claire looked surprised. "Suna, where did you get these rare goods?" "A temple." Suna sat down beside Claire. "Very lucky it's under the Freedom City." "You were able to hide it for so long." Claire was speechless. Suna said, "I had no choice, I didn't dare to leak it. We found some clues when we were working on the city's underground pipeline, and then we dug all the way until we found a temple. The temple worships a sun god and a moon god, but it belongs to the beast god." Claire asked, "Is it big?" Suna looked smug. "Not small. In a few years after we finish exploring the dangerous areas, we can consider opening it to the public. That might be able to turn the city's losses into profits." Claire asked, "Are we still losing money?" Suna restrained her expression and said helplessly, "What else?" Claire sighed. "It's really not easy." Suna shook her head. "People have to do something in life." Claire said, "That's true. It was better during the war, but now that the world is at peace, demons and ghosts have come out instead. Hybrids do need a place to stay." Suna nodded and said, "If you don't work hard, no one will work hard for you." They chatted for a while, and then turned to Dake. The Flaming Sun elves were naturally better than ordinary fire elves. However, in contrast, it was even more difficult to find a treasure of the same attribute as it. Dake originally had a gem that sealed a drop of fire elemental demon blood, which he had obtained from an egg in the cafeteria at Easter. If it was just an ordinary fire elf, that gem would be just right. But since it was a Flaming Sun elf, the only thing he could think of was the fruit of arrogance. But now he was accumulating arrogance like a little squirrel, and it was indeed not easy to use. But there seemed to be 3 stalks of the fruit of arrogance left. Dake estimated for a while, and wondered if he could squeeze these 3 stalks into juice. But one of them is a stalk with a crazy factor, and there may only be 2 that can be used. It's a bit difficult. While he was thinking, Claire asked, "You seem to have some ideas." Dake nodded and said, "A little." Claire said, "Then I won't help?" "Dake," Claire said slowly, "it's not good to reap without sowing. You'll have to rely on yourself." Kitty sighed. Dake said, "Then what about the other 2 questions?" Claire continued, "The 100 refinement ointment of the Great Bayer family is an extremely precious magic potion. Its main use is to eliminate accumulated injuries after high-intensity training and strengthen the body at the same time. Of course, it also has the effect of eliminating scars, but the effect is not very strong. I think you'll need it later." Dake, "Skip it." "Then the last one is diesel seed," Claire said. "You already know the origin of diesel seed. It has very strict requirements for the environment where it is planted. It needs to be planted in a place with a lot of people, and it's best if it's a place full of desires and desires. Although I don't think it's suitable, the most suitable places to plant it are casinos and fireflies." Dake gradually frowned. "Is there a second choice?" Claire said, "If it's 1 level lower, it's the underground arena, the boxing ring, and so on." Dake couldn't help but ask, "What about a place to live?" Claire smiled. "Of course, for the sake of Diesel's tree's safety, it can't really be planted in those chaotic places. I suggest planting it in the backyard. The people in the Duke's residence are enough for it to thrive. You probably don't know, but the leaves of Diesel's tree have a special function. Dake's brows relaxed and he asked curiously, "What is it?" Claire said, "Thought imprint." "Ding," Claire said. "It's a natural imprint. It can imprint the thoughts in one's mind onto the leaf, and it can be used repeatedly. The disadvantage is that the average person's thoughts aren't clear enough. It requires a high level of spiritual power. It's the perfect material to make a notebook." Dake immediately understood. Diesel's tree was full of treasures. It just depended on how it was used. As for the method to grow Diesel's tree, Claire smiled. "I suggest you give it to someone else like Olga. She'll definitely be able to handle it for you." As soon as she finished speaking, Olga, who was standing behind Dake, immediately patted her chest and said, "Young master, leave it to me." Dake didn't need to ask to know that the method to grow Diesel's tree would be extremely complicated and time-consuming. He could only leave it to the maids. Therefore, he didn't hesitate and said to Olga, "Sister Olga, I'll leave it to you." "No problem." Olga smiled. Claire looked at the deep affection between master and servant and couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She said, "I know that your need for Diesel's tree isn't low, but if you want to grow it to the point where it can be used in 3 months, you'll need a special method. Yelvet will tell you when the time comes." Dake nodded and patted the little demon's belly. The little demon understood and immediately flew to the wall, grabbed a newspaper, and flew back. Dake habitually opened the morning paper and began to eat. Of course, his habit didn't conform to strict dining etiquette. But who cared? Even maid teacher Vingo couldn't control him, let alone now. Claire also had a casual temperament now. She also opened the newspaper and read it. On the other hand, City Lord Montierfali didn't receive any aristocratic education, so she naturally didn't care. Aurora, on the other hand, had been eating her breakfast obediently. She only listened quietly during the process. After the meal, Dake took the initiative to invite her out. The two agreed to go out at 8:30, and then returned to their respective bedrooms. After Dake and Olga went back together, he gave her Diesel's seed, and told her to contact a trusted tutor as soon as possible. It would be best if she could interview a tutor before Yalvet's holiday tuition started. If the Duke's mansion wanted to hire a tutor, there would naturally be groups of people coming to interview. However, due to the special nature of students, it wasn't easy to find a suitable tutor. As Dake prepared to leave, he instructed, "Also, assign a supervisor to every magic elf. You know what I mean?" Of course, Olga understood. So did the magic elves. Therefore, they all perked up their ears and started to make a fuss. Fairy Ibu even used a ribbon to tightly wrap around his arm, desperately acting like a spoiled child. Dake didn't move. 3 and 1 6,000 plus that you're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.